Right, a very good morning. I think if we're all ready, we will begin. A warm welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Board of Friday the 4th of October 2019, held here in the committee suite in the Civic Centre in Poole. Welcome to all board members, members of the public and the press. I'll now open the meeting and pass over to Jill for some housekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council website in due course. Please could I remind everyone present to use their microphones when they're speaking. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although the Chairman has ultimate discretion and may halt recording or broadcast should he feel that it is disrupting proceedings. Please note that this meeting room is fitted with an induction loop for the benefit of hearing aid users. Hearing aids should be switched to the T setting. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests. If the alarm should constantly ring, please follow officers out of them by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the ground floor of the multi-storey car park. If you should need any specialist assistance, please let a member of staff know so that we can arrange for this to happen. Should you need to make use of them, toilets are just outside the door to the right and are clearly marked on the right-hand side of the corridor. Finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Many thanks. Item 1, apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillors May Haynes, Millie Earle, Rachel Maidment, Pete Miles and Lawrence Fear. Item 2, substitute members. We have received notification of the following substitutes. Councillor Lawrence Williams for Councillor May Haynes, Councillor Toby Johnson for Councillor Millie Earle, Councillor Mike Cox for Councillor Rachel Maidment and Councillor David Kelsey for Councillor Lawrence Fear. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of a disclosable pecuniary interest or other interests which they would like to make?
Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. For this afternoon's session on the Community Infrastructure Levy as Chairman of Broadstone Neighbourhood Forum.
Councillor Anderson.
Member of the Queen's Park Neighbourhood Forum.
That's noted, thank you.
Thank you. So we move to item 4, public speaking.
So we have received a request to make a public statement from Susan Chapman regarding a question that she is putting to Cabinet on the 9th of October.
Thank you. Welcome, Susan. I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. Morning. This board must scrutinise the upcoming Cabinet agenda, which means public questions, my preference today, should be in by 27th of September for a matter discussed nearly 2 weeks later. Please address this democratic handicap. My question for Cabinet queries the word none regarding number 30, Summary of Equality Implications for BCP Public Report, Response to Climate Change Emergency. 30 years of global climate inaction will impose huge, so far hidden and disproportionate costs on both poorer members of society as well as subsequent generations. Such inequity needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Board members, I do think that Mrs. Chapman has a very valid point. The way that we've actually got the system set up at the moment is that the deadline for public questions to our board is much earlier than the deadline for submission of statements and petitions. Considering one of the primary functions of the board is to be looking at the Cabinet papers which are released after the deadline for public questions, it does seem a little bit backwards and a bit of a democratic deficiency if members of the public are not able to ask questions because they don't know what the items actually are. It is within our power to request that this is amended. I think it has to go through the Audit and Governance Committee. So I would recommend that we ask Audit and Governance to look at this, and I would certainly feel as Chair very comfortable if the deadline for submitting questions was amended to be the same day as the deadline for the submission of statements and petitions. It would then enable the public to be able to ask questions which are actually relevant. Any comments from members of the board? Councillor Anderson.
I'm quite happy to make a move to either second or propose the oral suggestion.
Okay, a seconder?
I second that, and I think it's a really good idea, and I think it is a democratic deficiency, and I would thank the young lady for that suggestion to us.
Councillor, that was Councillor Lawton. Councillor Ayenga.
Totally supportive, Chairman, but also I'd suggest, is the deadline for statements and petitions also the correct one? Should that be looked at in the same exercise?
If we perhaps then... Oh, sorry, Councillor Farquhar.
No, I've just got a mechanical question. When questions are asked of full council, then a designated officer or portfolio holder answers them. Who on the board would answer a question that's put directly to the board from the public?
Jill.
It would normally be the chairman.
And it is within our discretion about where we might point that, which direction, if we felt it was an officer question, if it was something that the board could answer. But I think Chapman's point about, particularly in relation to items that we are scrutinising for Cabinet, unfortunately there's no mechanism within there at the moment. So we have a recommendation to ask Audit and Governance to look at this with a clear steer from the board that we'd be welcoming of a later submission deadline. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Williams.
As Vice Chair of Audit and Governance, I'll take that back. Thank you.
Okay, is the board happy with that? What, show of hands, all those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Chapman, for coming. No. It was a valid point that was missed actually. So hopefully that will correct it. Thank you very much for your time.
Chairman, just to advise the board that a number of people have responded to the invitation to give views on SIL as part of agenda item 6, so we will invite them to speak when we get to this item.
Is that in agreement with the board? Yeah. Great, thank you very much. In which case we will move on to the rest of the agenda. Just as a matter of how the order for today is going to run, we do have an adjournment after item 5, where we'll be adjourning for lunch, and then we'll come back for item 6 after the adjournment after lunch. We do not have item 7 on the agenda for today. That was in relation to the regeneration related cabinet reports. The 2 items that we were due to consider have been withdrawn from cabinet. I'm not aware that they have been put on the board plan yet, so we'll have to look at that again. However, I do think there is a very useful opening. One of the things that we've struggled with a little bit, which has been something that we need to get to grips with, is a collective view on the forward plan and items that as a board we may wish to consider, not just for the next meeting, but to horizon scan a little in the future. At our very early training, we talked as a board about the individual areas that members have interest in, and the aim, once the cabinet agenda slows down a little bit, to be bringing items to the board which we're driving and we want to look into deeply, rather than just be responding to items that are on cabinet. So with the board's approval, I'd suggest that we use that time after item 6 to have an open discussion about items we may wish to see on the forward plan and how to drive that forward. So unless there's any comments on that, I will move straight into item number 5, which is the scrutiny of corporate cabinet reports, and I invite Councillor Slade up. Thank you very much for coming. We've got 3 items that are due for cabinet for consideration on the 9th of October. 2 of which are within the side, but Councillor Slade is also here to speak on the Transforming Cities Fund Strategic Outline business case, as the portfolio holder for transport is absent at the moment. So I will then move straight to Councillor Slade. Councillor Slade, just as a matter of how we've been running this agenda, we will direct all questions to the portfolio holder. What I've tried to do in the last meeting, mainly to try and focus on the political steer and policies to direct everything through the policyholder. If there are any technical questions, perhaps if we draw them to the end of the discussion and then officers contribute at that point. It worked very well at the last meeting. In fact, Councillor Howell had no officer support at all, so and I thought it lent very, very useful and open discussion. So if we move straight to the corporate strategy, as with previous meetings, I'll ask if you would like to give an introduction.
With the corporate strategy, I think you're starting with the transforming cities.
No, the on the agenda we.
Okay,
yeah, sorry, the
fine.
corporate strategy, if that's all right.
Corporate strategy first.
So if you'd like to take us through and introduce the item. Thank you, Councillor Slade.
Thank you. Sorry, I had those in the wrong order. So the item on the corporate strategy is very much to note the summary of the feedback from the various stakeholders. It was great to see so many councillors come to the member session at the beginning of last week, week before, and I know that a number of members actually took the opportunity over the summer to incorporate discussion around the strategy to their member surgeries and the e-newsletters that they were sending out to their residents. So thank you so much for everyone for engaging so positively in that. There are a couple of things to note around the original plan. Just to be clear, that when we first launched what was originally called the corporate plan, we did have a meeting with Councillor Lordson as leader of the opposition to sort of gain some confirmation that it was the right direction as far as he was concerned, in the hope that this is something we can adopt as a whole council and in a unanimous way, because it's a great step in the right direction. A couple of bits of significant feedback. In the stakeholder events that we had, there was some feedback around the role of the voluntary and third sector. That because we were focusing very much about what we were going to be doing, it was sort of through a particular lens. So we've expanded it to make specific reference to how we'll work with the voluntary sector to pick up the incredible work that they do, and recognising the importance of what they do. Another significant thing was the description of it as a plan. That actually it's not a plan. The plan is what will follow from this, which is the strategy and the priorities. So you'll see that the actual document has changed in its name, and also a couple of significant changes around making sure that it's clear that the economy runs in a stronger way than it initially did. Again, it was originally designed as our lens, and actually we've tried to open it up into the wider lens. So you'll see additional references to working with businesses, expansion, the high street to also incorporate centres, local and town centres, as well as high streets, and a change in the wording of dynamic region. We've used that because it's a little bit of a buzzword, so it's got become dynamic places. Recognising that there are a number of places within the area rather than a single place, and that was really important. So obviously I'd like to recommend a report that will then go to council for adoption, having gone through the various stakeholder methods. The next stage will be the delivery plan. The delivery plan will be around how each of those areas sort of goes from being a skeleton into the detail of how we would deliver it, which are the priorities, and most importantly how it dovetails with the budget, because there's no point having priorities if we can't afford them.
Thank you very much. I'll just open the discussion, if I may. Obviously we need to have a corporate plan, and it's very hard to disagree with a lot of things in there, so well done for the start. You mentioned that there's been a little bit of a change, so rather than coming with a fully formed corporate plan, it's to start, to use your words, with a skeleton and then look at building on it afterwards. So start with a strategy and then build on the delivery plan. What would the timescales be, do you envision, on coming forward with a kind of a fuller delivery plan, if you like?
So the budget, obviously, work is in February, so the delivery plan will be expected before that. So the work is starting now on taking it from where it is now. Obviously, it has to be adopted for us to be able to say this is our strategy. So the work has already started. Bridget's team are already working on looking at the detail around a lot of the feedback that came back from the over 2,000 individuals, plus the stakeholder events that we had, were around items that belong in the detailed plan. So that work is already starting, mapping out what that looks like and how that will fit in.
Questions and comments from the board. Councillor Lawton.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor, for bringing this forward. Yes, you're right, we did meet and I totally agreed with the priorities and the general thrust of the way the council should go. It's pleasing to see that, not that you wouldn't have done, but it's pleasing to see you've taken account of the public awareness and the public response to this particular one, and I'm pleased to see that you've taken account of the local economy, which is obviously vibrant for all of us, and taken account of the voluntary sector. So in general terms, it's a strategy, it's a plan for us to go forward, and I totally agree with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawton. Councillor Brooke.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. It's really to echo what Councillor Lawton has said, but also just to make the point that I think the process that has been operated this time has to be welcomed on the basis that it has given the public a say at the very beginning of formulating the strategy and developing the plan, as opposed to having the strategy imposed upon us. And councillors have also had that opportunity for input, which hasn't always been the case in my experience in the past.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. Other comments or questions? I just have one which is just relating to that consultation. I agree with Councillor Brooke that the public involvement is extremely important because it's their place and we're here to represent them. You mentioned that it's difficult to come up with the further detail of the plan until you've seen what the budget holds. I'm just wondering how you envision further engagement, because you commented that some of the engagement that came back were about issues which will need further development, which is great, but then you also said that obviously we can't do too much further development until we know what is possible within the budget. So how do you see further engagement coming in, if there is any, because I'm assuming there will be? How would that fit into, will it come before the budget work or after the budget work? Just hoping to get some guidance. Thank you.
So there isn't a plan to further engage the public on the delivery plan, because the delivery plan is for us as a council to adopt, having taken account of what the public have told us is important. We have to deliver the budget in February. If you actually look at the summary of risk assessments, the delivery plans will be presented in February. So, we've made it clear in those engagement events that this is the opportunity for people to put their stake in the ground, what they want to see in it. But to actually go back and then consult back on the delivery plan would actually, have us in the weeds for months. And we've made it quite clear that actually, at some point there's public consultation. At some point, as a council, we have to take responsibility for what we're going to deliver. And it's about sort of flipping it on its head and putting that consultation at the beginning rather than at the end.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd very much agree that the time for consultation is being done in the right order and in the right way. And what we don't want to end up is in a situation where things have to get further put back because of additional consultation around something which is purely our responsibility as a council. I also think that it's a very reasonable plan for a new authority, taking the best bits of the individual preceding councils and then putting a flavour of the new one on. I think necessarily being a new council and new administration, it has to be a little bit light compared with established organisations. And so my question is, when would we be looking at this being the first revision of the corporate plan? Because it necessarily will have to evolve as we learn more about how the conurbation works together. And so I would have thought that it needs to be just a little bit quicker than it generally would be for an established organisation. Thank you.
Councillor Slade.
I think that's a really fair point. Originally, the document had the date on it. We've done is changed it to say adopted date, so that we're actually giving it the opportunity to be reviewed. I don't think we've set in stone when we should review it, but I will take that away and actually think about we need to give it time to achieve some stuff. So you don't want to be reviewing it every year and, not getting a chance to actually see anything from the delivery. So I think we need to take some advice from look at the things that are in the delivery plan. There will be things that can be delivered in 1 year. There are things that will take 3 or 4 years. There are things that will be much more long-term ambition. So I think it is a good idea to plan for a refresh. At the moment, I haven't got a date for that. Can I come back to you in consultation? Is that okay?
Councillor Green.
If I may, I'm actually not looking for a fixed date. I think it's just something that I believe that as a council, both administration and opposition, is worth thinking about and making sure that we don't allow it to slip beyond where it stops making sense for us, if you like.
I'm quite happy if you want to make a recommendation that there is that we have a regular refresh. Then I think that's wholly sensible.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to make that recommendation, or to leave it to Cabinet to have a think about in the meantime, and to work from there. But certainly I would support that. But I think maybe it's better coming from Cabinet rather than from ONS. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think we've got the assurance that is very much on the agenda anyway. So I think we're all in broad agreement.
I'm quite happy that when I present it to Cabinet next week, actually add that in. Okay.
Yeah, excellent. Any other comments, questions, priorities that have been missed? Or are we all satisfied? I think it does seem to be quite a full set of priorities for the area, and as we've heard, will develop into something more as and when time progresses. If we are comfortable with that, Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, I just wanted to echo some of the points which are made already. It's the corporate strategy is certainly the correct terminology, but what I really welcome is the opportunity that the new authority of reaching out to the public and giving them an opportunity to be involved in the direction that their town's moving. So that question, even though it wasn't a statutory requirement, was very welcome by residents of my ward, to give them an opportunity to say these are the things which affect us. So I'd just like to pay some compliment to the new direction of how we actually approach the three towns as an authority.
Councillor Slade.
Yeah, I'd actually like to pay tribute to the team that delivered it, because they did a lot of stuff out in the field. To get over 2,000 individual responses was for something which is quite ethereal, really. I mean, you have something that relates to your daily life, people all jump all over it, but this is quite remote, and we have had people comment to us that they liked the way that a lot of it was done online. They liked the opportunity that they had through Facebook and things to engage with it. So, I think that we've set a good start about how we encourage people to engage, and I think that's across the board. I think it's, all 76 members have had some input in that, but more importantly, the policy and the engagement team have done a really good job. So I think that bodes well for the future, and we have sort of set a bit of a high standard that people will now be expected to consult a lot on a lot of things. So, you can expect more of the same, and I think we all have a role to play in that as ward representatives.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a really valid point. That method of engagement is changing, and is something that we need to be keeping abreast of as time goes on, because we've all been in that situation, whereas when you're talking about the potholes on people's roads, then they're very, very concerned. When you're talking about aspirations for sustainability and all of that, everybody believes in it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they give you your opinion. Actually, I think across the board, some of the engagement that has been done and that we've been doing and Cabinet's been doing has shown that people do actually care about these things, and the easier we can make it for them, the more likely they are to engage. So it's a very positive experience. If there's no further comments or questions, I think we've covered that one, and thank you to Councillor Slade for the commitment to keep looking at that going forward. So if we move on through the agenda, we will move to the next item within the Corporate Cabinet report, which is the Equality and Diversity Strategy. Jill, do you want to just take us through one little bit? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to advise members that unfortunately an appendix has been missed off the Cabinet report. This has now been rectified and republished. It's Appendix B, the Corporate Equality Action Plan. It's referred to in the report, but it's not actually listed at the back as an appendix, so that's an office admin error, I'm afraid. I do have copies of it to slate if members would like to have a brief moment to
if we pass those round, so at the very least, rather than sat here for 10 minutes reading them, it does mean that members can refer to them throughout the course of the discussion. Thank you very much. In the meantime, while we do our superhuman read-through, all very interesting, I'll pass to Councillor Slade, who can give us the formal introduction to this item. Councillor Slade, thank you.
I was rather frustrated when I was looking for it myself, and I realised it was missing, so thanks to everyone for getting that back on board as quickly as possible. So obviously as an authority we are required to have a policy that explains how we will meet our responsibilities under the Equalities Act, and in particular the public sector equality duty. What we've got here is a policy and a governance framework which sets out how we will make sure that any equalities implications for any key decisions that we make are actually reflected in the policy. There's a piece of work around the overall steering group and governance structure, and then at the top, so who is responsible for making sure that this work is actually being done, and then drilling down into service unit heads and who is the champion of equalities within each of the services, so that we can make sure that this is properly embedded and not a tick box exercise. I think we would all agree that equalities should not be a tick box exercise. It should be part of what we do, and we're thinking about what the implications of our policy decisions are on people, and especially where they have a lawful right to be separately considered. The policy, there are a couple of changes that I've asked for to the policy. If I could just make reference to those since it's been published. And they've come partly as a result of some communication I've had with Councillor Dunlop around language. So the first thing is that if you look at section 1, which is who the policy applies to, so that's of the actual policy, there's a big section about, it says that the policy is applicable to all who represent BCP Council, and then it goes on to make reference to particular people, so regardless of age, caring, civil status, trade union membership, and a whole load of other things. And my reflection when I looked at that was, if it applies to all, it applies to all. Therefore, there is absolutely no reason to list certain people. So I've asked for that to be completely deleted, so that it reads, it applies to everyone in day-to-day interactions with customers when considering changes to employment practices, service change, or creating or reviewing policy. I hope you'll be satisfied that that makes far more sense. The second thing is a very minor change in 5.2, where we've obviously changed our priorities to say dynamic places. The report still says dynamic region because of the timing, so that is a typing change that needs to be made. And I think Councillor Dunlop raised a question with me at full council around some of the equalities, some of the comments on some of the reports for the previous cabinet made different descriptions of what was covered by our equalities reports. And and it was rather confused. There was some really inconsistent language, and that reflects officers trying to come to terms with their own use of language, and maybe a slightly less than robust system whereby everything needs to go funneled through the equalities team to make sure the right language is being used. But I think Councillor Dunlop talked about the 9 protected characteristics and reference being made to other groups. We've looked at the Equalities Act, and the impact assessments must, of course, make specific reference to the protected characteristics, but don't preclude us from looking at additional groups of people where it is so appropriate. So what I've asked Bridget to look at is changing the wording under 6.5, which states an equality impact assessment EIA must be undertaken and support key decisions and policies. To add the phrase, impact assessments must at least consider, but not be limited to, the protected characteristics as set out in the Equality Act 2010. It then lists those 9 protected characteristics, and then adds a phrase which we've actually taken from this local government wording, which says other locally appropriate characteristics which are evidenced as suffering inequality should also be considered. And that gives officers the opportunity, where there are issues related to particular socio-economic groups, maybe single mums or people who don't have an automatic right, that we can reference it. And the language I've asked to be used under the phraseology on papers, and I'll be checking these as they come through, is that we say, is there a reference to people who are protected, lawfully protected under the Equalities Act, protected characteristics? Yes or no? And then obviously if there is a link then to the equality impact assessment. But a separate reference to any other groups which might be disadvantaged. So that it's not something we have to do, it's something that we can choose to go further than the basics. And I would like to think that we will consider those other groups even when we are not legally required to do so. It feels like we're going beyond the minimum. So those are the changes. And there is one other change that I have asked for, and I hope that you'll welcome this, and that is in Appendix A, which is the structure. There is a steering group at the top, which includes the Chief Executive, Portfolio Holder, and some additional people. And I've actually asked, Portfolio Holder is myself as the Equalities and Diversity Lead. I've actually asked for the opposition spokesperson on equalities to be added to that group. Partly there's only one member on it, and I think that's a bit officer heavy, and partly because I think that it actually allows us to show that we are all embracing this issue rather than it being a political thing, because it's not political. This is a human thing. So I hope you'll be content with that change.
I totally support that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Slade. So I have a number of people waiting. Councillor Green, Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a specific question for Councillor Slade based on something you just said, and that's and obviously we haven't seen the written down wording, and I absolutely understand the issue of trying to nail down something which is both precise and general, but I'm just it was illustrated to me by the fact that in the first part of the sentence you said, apologies what the exact context was, it was groups which have been evidenced. And then later on you went on to say might be, and groups who might be disadvantaged. And I know that we want to cover both of those, but I would value some precision around the language, because either it's evident or they might be. And I just wonder if you can perhaps take that away and make sure that that wording is absolutely clear.
I'm quite happy. Sorry. There was a conversation with officers around what we have to do as a minimum and what we would strive to do as a desirable outcome. But you're right, language is so important, as we've discovered over the last few weeks. And I completely agree, and I'd be more than happy to take that away and let's get this language nailed down. Every word matters. I think the thrust of what I'm wanting to get from this is that let's not just do the bare minimum. Actually, if there are groups of people, let's at least go should we be considering those people? If we need to get the language right, if you're happy for me to refer to Matty and Bridget to get that nailed down, I'm content with that, and I'm happy to report that back to you so that you can add that to future minutes.
Councillor Green.
Very happy.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair.
And welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very pleased. At risk of embarrassing myself with lack of knowledge about the 9 protected characteristics, which I couldn't actually list. When I worked through the report, I thought, what actually are they? But now you're going to include it. I think that's answered the question. But all I would say is on Appendix A, if you're going to not limit it to the 9 protected characteristics, maybe you need a little change to the employee equality champions block, where it does actually say staff representatives for the 9 protected characteristics. So you may need just to alter the wording on that very slightly.
Thank you. Bridget's made a note of that. Thank you. And I equally, I think there was a missing bit in not listing what they are, so that we're really clear on it.
Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you. As I said at Council a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you would come up with a decent equality and diversity strategy, and I'm quite right, you have. And I thank you for that, and I thank you even more for the changes that you've made. I think they are essential changes to be made. Under Bournemouth Council, we strive to become gold with Stonewall and everything, and I hope we're going to do that with this as well. But yeah, I'd like to thank you for this. I think it's a very well-worded document, and I look to working with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brooke.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Kelsey there, I welcome this document and the contents of it. But drawing on a little bit of past experience, when councils have approved new policies, that is often the last one hears or sees of them, and you never know to the extent to which they are actually embedded within the council processes. It doesn't always become clear. And when I once challenged the Chief Executive on this, the comment, when I asked him, how do we know, the comment that came back was, well, it just is. So the point I'm raising is there an opportunity for this board or another scrutiny board on an annual basis just to review how the policy is developing, how it's being implemented, because I think that will then give us all the assurances that we actually need. It is a really, really good policy, and I would hate it just to sort of filter away a little bit without us all appreciating how well it is actually going.
Thank you, Councillor Brooke. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads around, but I'll pass over to Julian Osthorpe, who has a comment.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Brooke. I can confirm it's already established as an annual item on the Audit and Governance Forward Plan, so there will be a regular review by that board of the success or otherwise of the implementation of the policy.
Does that answer your point sufficiently, Councillor Brooke?
I think so.
Super. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a question on the substantive paper, and I endorse the supportive comments that have been made, and thank Councillor Slade for her own leadership of this, which I absolutely believe to be embedded in everything you do, and thank you also for your warm words of support at Council. But the question that I have for you, which I'm sure you will have anticipated, is in your absence, what credibility does the political leadership have, given that you're already opposed a council motion to uphold the protected characteristics and condemn prejudice?
Councillor Slade.
Yeah, of course I expected this. I have given some serious consideration to whether we should be making specific references to particular groups in the equalities policy, and taken advice and decided that it would actually be more divisive to that. So I will reference that first of all, because whilst I completely and utterly condemn anti-Semitism, I also completely and utterly condemn all forms of hate crime, Islamophobia, LGBT, there are all sorts of things, and I think the purpose of the Equality Act is to not single out. So I think we've done the right thing in really thinking about, should we reference it, should there be a footnote, because it is a changing world, and something which was not a problem a few years ago now becomes a problem. Next year could become a problem that we're not thinking about. So with that I have given some serious consideration to that. I can't speak for another member. For what it's worth, I don't believe that there is an issue with regard to any members of BCP Council being anti-Semitic. I recognise completely, because I've looked at the international definition of anti-Semitism, and I've challenged and heavily challenged, and I'm sure that my colleagues in the Alliance will reflect that I challenged on whether it was the appropriate thing to distance himself from the motion around the issue of the definitions. And I have explained that I don't believe that the definitions and the examples are one and the same. He is of a different opinion. We disagree on that, and I regret that we disagree on that, because I wholeheartedly support the international definition of anti-Semitism and abhor any form of hate or discrimination. I simply can't. The leadership is I am the leader. Yes, the deputy leader has a view, but I believe that if he demonstrates at any time something which does not fulfil the Equalities Policy or the Equalities Act, he should be taken to task for it. I don't believe his concern around the definition and the examples do that, but should he demonstrate anything which does, I would fully expect you to bring a claim.
Thank you for that, Councillor Slade. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. To be explicit again, I am not in any way questioning your own commitment to this agenda. Not a bit. What I'm asking you is about your judgment in choosing a deputy who cannot support a council motion to hold the protected characteristics. This wasn't an issue of not voting.
Councillor Slade.
I don't believe that he's not upholding the protected characteristics. I don't believe that he is. I don't believe that he is doing anything which is disadvantaging any group of people by holding a personal belief. It is about how he acts. His personal belief about the people of Palestine are his personal beliefs. And if he were to be acting on behalf of the council, then that would be a different thing. He's not. He's acting on behalf of himself. The policy is now the policy of BCP Council. There is no question that as far as BCP Council is concerned, we have signed up to a motion of anti-discrimination and not tolerating any form of discrimination. And that's what we've all signed up to.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'll let you come back again.
So, thank you, Councillor Slade, because I realised that was a very difficult issue, and I won't press it further, but I do just think it is clear, it is in the minutes what happened, who decided it was the appropriate thing to stand shoulder to shoulder against all prejudice and intolerance, and the voting in that meeting was minuted.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions on this section? Councillor Williams.
I didn't realise this was coming up this morning when I agreed to substitute, but I have to say I was really hurt at that last council. I'm Jewish, and I took it very, very personally, and what made it even worse was the deputy leader's inability to see the other view, and I really don't think he's a right and proper person to be sitting where he sits on your cabinet, but that's just my opinion. Thank you.
I'll move move on. Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, I echo this. It's a fantastic policy. What I just wanted, because it's a subject close to my heart and to Councillor Kelsey's, is that in Appendix B, page 4, whereby disadvantaged groups, which you wouldn't necessarily take into account, I would welcome that. We are going that step further beyond the protected characteristics in law to actually identify individuals, and in this particular case it's the fact that the ECHO signed the Armed Forces Covenant, and that Councillor Kelsey, I welcome him to the board here and to see him here, is the champion to make sure that that disadvantaged group is actually represented in the council, and there's a thread that goes through his dealings with all our staff that might well be involved with somebody. And essentially what came out from my understanding is that we have to ask the question sometimes is, have you served previously? Because that identifies a characteristic whereby they're disadvantaged. And I think as a council, and I know that Councillor Kelsey will champion this, is that that's a question we have to ask of anybody that comes to the council to avail themselves of our services, because it's a disadvantaged group which is not one of the protected characteristics, but often they will have those protected characteristics which will come out from asking that particular question, have they served before?
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I think we're all fully agreed that not limiting gives that ability to put the focus where possible. I would certainly welcome that as well. Councillor Lawton.
Thank you, Councillor Slade, and thank you for the constructive comments from Councillor Dunlop in readjusting this paper, which we all welcome. We certainly welcome, and I understand the embarrassment that you feel with your deputy leader, but we all have our crosses to bear sometimes. But we'll take that as it comes. I'm pleased that you've adjusted that you will take account of the opposition, which is ourselves, equalities person, which is Andy Jones, and we certainly welcome that, and we welcome this paper in its overall view. None of us likes to see discrimination of any kind, of colour, creed or sex, and certainly thank you for your forthright and honest answers this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've pretty much exhausted that. It's a love fest today, Councillor Slade. I'm sure it will continue. I can't see what could possibly go wrong. So without further ado, we'll move on to the next item, which is the Transforming Cities Fund Strategic Outline business case. And as I mentioned earlier on to colleagues, Councillor Slade is here on behalf of the portfolio holder for transport, although I think we would all agree that this is a very big item that covers the whole conurbation, so the synergies are ideal. I'll take a slight pause because apparently an hour and a half is too much for some people without a caffeine boost, and I'm very grateful for all the offers of coffee for the chair.
Every person for themselves, Chair.
Yes, so much for equality. So I'm all right. If I start flagging, then you'll know. So I'll pass over to Councillor once again to introduce the item on transforming cities. Thank you, Councillor Slade.
Thank you. Whilst I think it's fantastic that Councillor Hadley was able to get through his last thing without any reference to officers, I would just stress that this isn't my portfolio. I have stepped into this at the last minute, so I will do my very best. I have been engaged in the Transforming Cities work, but I'm not a technical person, so forgive me if I may need a little assistance. Just a little bit of background. As you'll have seen in the report, the Transforming Cities Fund was launched last year. We didn't meet the criteria to be able to apply on our own, even as BCE, and therefore we have worked with Dorset Council, the former Dorset County Council, to extend our reach out to Wareham, Wimborne and Ferndown. This isn't a takeover, although some people feel they should be part of the conurbation. But in order to achieve the critical mass that we need to be able to bid for this money, we're looking outside our boundaries to the additional corridors, where, of course, a lot of people are coming in from those areas to work and having an impact on the congestion within our boundaries. I think we do need to pay tribute to Conor Burns MP on this, because the original 10 cities that were selected did not include South East Dorset. And he worked really hard when it was extended to 12 cities, to make we were one of the 2 additional areas that was included. And I think, we do have to make reference to that. We came to this quite late because the deadline for submitting the outline business case was in June. Officers made myself, Andy and Chief Exec aware of the report is almost ready to go. We literally spent a weekend sitting at home helping to structure bits and making sure bits we felt were really important were added. We were asked, as you can see in the report, for what we would spend significant amounts of money on, ranging from about 60,000 right the way up to over 100 million pounds. And we were told us that actually the fund was so oversubscribed that all cities were likely to get a lot less than they had asked for. And our low bid, which you'll see the original bids in there, was then asked to be squeezed yet further. There were a number of things which we had wanted to include, which the government have thrown out, and they've been quite clear that they are very specifically interested in particular transport corridors and the increase in usage of public transport, in this case buses. They are not interested in this particular fund in trains, which is something that we are working really hard to improve, and I know other members are really keen to improve as well. But the increase in bus patronage, walking and cycling. And so you'll see that the later iterations have focused in more and more on particular projects within that. I've just had something come into my diary to say I've got a meeting with the Transforming Cities team later on this month. They are now due to come down and visit to talk about where we are with the staging in anticipation of the full business case being submitted in November. So the purpose of this coming to the board and to Cabinet is to delegate the detail around building that business case to the portfolio holder and the head of growth and infrastructure in conjunction with his officers, to make sure that we are ready to make the most of that opportunity. We won't know until the spring whether we have been given any or all money. You will notice that within the report there are a number of options around the low bid. The preferred option includes the bus station in Poole. The DfT were very keen that that formed part of the bid. However, they've also been very clear there is a very strict deadline to delivery of this project. And so, in being mindful that delivery of a new bus station is not just our responsibility, we have to work with the bus company, and we have to work in conjunction with whether a bus depot can be part of the project. There is a risk that that part of the project might not meet the deadline. And therefore, the officers have come up with options 2 and 3 around that low level, so that if there is no flexibility on that timescale, we've put in additional transport corridors as an alternative. And that's really to give the government the chance to either say, yes, we like your original plan and we're prepared to be flexible, or as we suspect, we're not going to be flexible, what's your alternative, rather than waiting for them to tell us that and then no time to respond. So I welcome comments and questions on the report, but bearing in mind technical stuff about journey times is probably not my thing.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. In which case I will direct colleagues where possible to talk about the bigger picture, perhaps the process and parts of it that you've been involved with to start with, and maybe try and save some of the juicy technical questions for a little later. So going to colleagues on the board, Councillor Farquhar.
This isn't a specific question to technical question or to the portfolio holder in his absence. It's simply an observation, because I'm new to this world of politics, and one of the things which was thrown up by the BCP coming together is remaining the idea of the town. So that was very important to our residents. I'm sure there's not a single ward councillor in this room that has not come across that on the doorstep. But what I do really appreciate is the fact that this southeast Dorset City region was identified as an ability for us as an authority to open doors where we've not got funding before as individual towns. So I just want to praise the actual work that's gone in at very short notice, where we had no opportunity and we weren't in the running at all, to actually take advantage of our city region status to actually get a dibs in on this particular pot. So my thanks to the officers, etc., that put this together in very, very quick order. And I'm sorry that even that was squeezed some more.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Other questions? Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And before I go into that, I think maybe I should just let Councillor Farquhar know that I think he might have got the idea a little bit wrong about timeframes on this. What was decided, and it was that when we recognised that the 400,000 was the minimum that the previous authorities of Bournemouth, Poole and part of Dorset got together and submitted these bids approximately, well, we started on this just over 2 years ago, or just a little bit more than 2 years ago actually, and then we were awarded the status approximately, I think was it October last year, something like that. Sorry?
We were rejected the first time.
We were rejected the first time,
yeah,
and then we were asked, when we got the extra two,
that was in March, I believe.
We were given the nod that we were going to be able to do it. So it's been advantageous that we were able to get together as one BCP, which obviously has the vast majority of the bid part in it, but also to be working as we were with Dorset Council. It's an interesting time for me actually reading through this and seeing, because I was the lead member when we put this together, and together with Ian Potter in Poole, spent a lot of time with the Department for Transport and with through the LEP, through the Western Gateway Board, on putting ourselves in a position where we would be able to become one of the 12 cities. So I've been pleased to see the vast majority of that pushed through and into this report, because it is absolutely, if not a once in a lifetime, then a once in a generation opportunity to be awarded the sort of money for transport projects which actually exceeds anything that the conurbation has had in the past. So I'll try and keep us away as much as I can from the technical side, but I do have, if it's okay, Chairman, a number of questions to put on this.
I'm not surprised, Councillor Green.
But this has been about 2 years of my life.
I doubt that Councillor Slade is going to be particularly surprised, so far away.
And the first thing I just wanted to check, having been involved in all those discussions, obviously not just with officers, but particularly with DFT Direct, and with a substantial number of different subnational organisations to be able to get us to this stage. We put together a package of 150 million, which you can see in Appendix B, and I'll come back to that again shortly, if I may. But I was certainly, when we were looking forward to submitting the bid, we were looking at a high again, if people, hopefully people have read all the paper, but we were asked to submit 3 levels. So one being your core, which is the low ask, the medium one to give you considerably more benefits, and the high ask, which was basically saying, here's our big wish list. We know we're not going to quite get there. And given the time that we had available, we actually pushed the overall list down to 150, anticipating that would be roughly the high. We were expecting that each of the 12 authorities, well, each of them will get about 102 million on average. There's actually, it's not in here, I believe maybe Bill will be able to help on that. There's actually an extra couple of 100 million which came into this, because we were actually looking, when you take it all together, about 1.4, weren't we? Yeah, the pre-out, yeah. But once you take it all into account. So we were hoping between 100 and 120 million if we got average, basically. So my first question, again, I'm trying to make sure it's not on the technical, is why have we reduced that down so much? I recognise that, having been involved in other bids, etc., that there's always a negotiation and there's always that's going to be a bit too much, isn't it, from DFT and the other governmental bodies. But it strikes me as a little under-ambitious that we've now only looking at a high of 117, so a high of the average that would be expected.
So Slade.
Yeah, there were specific items within that original 150 which the government said, we're not funding those things, we do not want to fund them, they do not form part of what we're prepared to do, and therefore remove them. And at that point the bid had already been submitted. It was then made clear in the feedback that we received in July and in the subsequent meeting in August that actually we're not going to get anywhere near 100 anyway, which was incredibly disappointing, because like you, a simple calculation, £1.2 billion divided by 12 cities, we should be 100 million-ish each. It's quite clear that there is the agenda is that there are some cities that they're going to give a significantly greater amount to, and that we don't know why they are saying actually you're probably only going to get closer to your low. So actually at that point to start putting more items in to top up the 117 back 150, when we've been given a very clear steer that we're not even going to get 75, would have been a waste of resource. So the focus has gone on saying, fine, you don't want to cover those things, they came out of the original 150 to make 117, but actually our focus has been on the 73 and the 66, those lower two, to say those are the ones that we're within striking distance, and we could make an argument for, let's put our energy and our officer resource into those.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it okay if we sort of dialogue this?
If that's okay with Councillor Slade? Rather than me say your name each time, if there's a number of questions.
I'm quite happy, and I would rather, if it's okay with you, and okay with the Green, to deal with the questions one by one rather than save them up, because otherwise my brain will go fuzzy.
No, absolutely fine. Yeah, no problem.
Very happy. I think that's a very, very sensible way of looking at it. I mean, it is a little bit disappointing, because that's not the gist. I mean, it may have been the change of administration that may have pushed that, but that's certainly not the gist of the conversations that I personally was having with DFT. And but I suppose it would be a bit of a technical one. We were aware that particularly the technology part of it, that some of that may be given less favour. But that in itself, only, even taking everything together, only added up to, I think, just over 10 or 11 million out of the 150 that we put in. So can you let us know, this possibly is one to pass on to the officers, which other ones we were told absolutely no by the DFT?
Before I pass to Richard about the detail, I think it's also just worth stressing we're up against places like West Yorkshire. Those places have been given an indication that their larger bids are going to be successful, ours are not. So whilst I'm happy for Richard to explain why it went from 150 down to 117. It's sort of a moot point because we're not going to get 117. You know, that has been made very, very clear that is not going to be something which South East Dorset is going to get. So, you know, we could write a bid for 150, but actually let's concentrate on what we can achieve. As far as the detail of why it went slightly down on the high level, Richard, can I hand that on to you?
Yeah, I think, sorry, forgive me, I might have misunderstood the amount that you've just said there. You say, was it 10 million was in the original?
We had, if I remember, it's something like about is 10 to 12 million on the technology.
So the 10 to 12 million in the original expression of interest was purely for the kind of what they describe as the brain, the sort of central technology which would manage a traffic control system across the whole conurbation. What was also within the corridors that are listed within that expression of interest was a significant amount of ducting that we required for fibre optic cabling. So actually, when the DfT moved away from more technology-based bids, obviously a lot of the amounts of funding that were allocated to those corridors are effectively removed from the expression of interest as well. So that's why it's come down in significant scale.
Thank you. So okay, if I just keep going as suggested. Thank you. The technology part of it, I think, is the items T1 to T4 on page 220. And I believe that some of the ducting was included in those T to T4 rather than the corridor sections. These being the network management system, the new traffic control room, and the intelligent transport system and connected vehicles, which in total were 10 million.
They were also included within those corridor sums as well.
Thank you.
So the majority of those costs were within those corridors.
So it's reducing down the corridor sums. Okay, and obviously, I'm just going to push a little bit more on the amount that's being bid for, and I quite understand that DfT came back, as you sort of might expect, to say, look, you're oversubscribed, and you've got details of that in paragraph 15 on page 213. But that was the sum of the 12 low-level asks, and so I still got to express some disappointment that our low-level ask, that was already at 73 million, and therefore only about 70% of the average that was going to be got, that we're then looking to push the low-level ask down still further into the 60s.
So if we refer you to the meeting that took place in August, it was at that meeting that they dictated that that's what they're prepared to consider, and therefore that is how we have revised the bid, and we've spent the officer time working up those schemes that we have an opportunity to actually get funding for, rather than spending officer time on projects which it's been indicated will not be supported. Is there anything technical to add on that?
There was just some clarification, which is a failure on my part as one of the authors of the report, in so much as the amounts that are stated within the report in terms of ask of Transforming Cities funding. So in addition to Transforming Cities funding, as an authority, we will also be providing local transport plan match funding, and also partners and also developer contributions will also be included. So for absolute clarity, the low ask within the original draft SOBC was actually, the overall programme value was 102 million. So the 73 should be read as 102 million. The high ask within the original draft SOBC will read as 117 million, but actually would have been a £147 million programme. So that's actually, substantially larger than is demonstrated. Apologies if that's not clear in the report.
And I have got quite a few, actually, George. So I know, I'm sure that the chairman has seen the indicating the meeting that was on the 20th of August that you were referring to, and obviously there's a July one as well. Which cabinet members were at that, please?
I wasn't at it, so I'm not aware of who was at it. It was the officers with DfT representatives. It wasn't a political meeting.
If I'm going to comment on that, no easy way to say it. If that had been me, as Bill will know, I would have insisted on being there, because the relationships are forged, not just with the officers, that if there is political ownership, and one of the reasons that we were able to get on that you identified, because we had Conor Burns involved and actually other MPs as well, was because we, as politicians, had a real grip on what was going on and ensured that we were using our influence to guarantee that the development was going to go ahead and that the DFT would get, and the government generally, would get what they were bargaining for. So I am disappointed to hear that those meetings have taken place without leadership, political leadership involvement, because this is about transforming our cities, names on the tin. Maybe I just move off from that then to ask. Conor was involved, as were others, because we as politicians got them involved. As we've seen pressure from the DFT coming in to reduce the amount that we felt that we were going to get, or we believed certainly prior to May that we were going to. How have you, or how has Andy, used the MPs between May and now to push that up? What meetings have taken place between DFT, what lobbying of the MPs, and what have they done for us?
So we weren't told until August that the amount that we were potentially going to be awarded is reduced. I then had a meeting with Tobias and Conor. Michael Tomlinson turned up for a few minutes and then left. The other two MPs didn't turn up. It was supposed to be all 5 MPs with myself and the Chief Executive. We travelled to London specifically for it. At that meeting, Conor and Tobias both actually expressed real support for what we were doing, and Conor particularly offered to champion this for us, to speak to Grant Shapps. I have said that I would like him to do that, and I have asked senior officers to prepare a paper so that I can liaise directly with Conor to make that happen.
That's very encouraging to hear. And this was specifically a Transforming Cities Fund meeting, so which was
no, it was a meeting with the 5 MPs during which the Transforming Cities Fund was an agenda item. I have had other meetings with Tobias on other matters. I have not been able to secure any additional meetings with Conor Burns, and I've not been able to secure any meetings whatsoever Robert Sims.
Sorry, I'm asking specifically about Transforming. Yeah, this is the biggest amount of funding available for this city region ever. So we were holding meetings prior to May with MPs on transforming cities. Are you saying there has not been a specific Transforming Cities Fund meeting with MPs since the new administration took over?
If I could make it even more specific, are you saying that you've requested meetings with MPs on the Transforming Cities Funds and they have been rejected?
I have not had a specific meeting regarding Transforming Cities Fund. I'm not the portfolio holder responsible for the Transforming Cities Fund. I have asked officers to prepare a paper so that I can see Conor to raise this with Grant Shapps on our behalf to lobby for it, because Conor has taken a specific interest in trying to make sure that this moves forward. In the early days, we were made aware of the Transforming Cities Fund bid days before the submission was made. We engaged specifically with making sure that we were happy with the content, and the feedback since then has been with civil servants. You may well have had a very good relationship with your MPs. It is incredibly difficult to get those meetings with those MPs, particularly when they are working in the situation that they are. The whole political situation is very difficult at the moment, and whilst we're doing our very best to speak with the MPs and have meetings with them, I'm sorry if you don't feel that that's been good enough, but we're doing what we can.
If I may, I'm going to sort of close down the bit on that meeting with the MPs. I have to say that I am incredibly disappointed that there have not been from the sound of it, any requests for meeting about TCF with our MPs, who are the ones who can lobby for those extra tens of millions, and it's likely to be the most successful way through. But I understand, and I also understand, Councillor Slade, that you're not the portfolio holder, and it may be that Councillor Hadley has been able to do those, obviously without officers, and to get where you want your 18 forward, and I'm not quite certain that's been the case. I've got this one. I think you'll probably find to be more technical, so you may wish to use the officers, and that's around the financial implications, which are contained on page 22 to 25, paragraphs 22 to 26 on page 214. And again, I had an idea about where we were going to be looking at, the sort of money we were looking at to raise the bids. And in fact, the couple of senior guys at DFT specifically said to me, make sure you spend enough, because this is your one chance. It looks, when sort of totting up the numbers in 22 to 26, that is exactly what's happening. And if so, I'm very pleased about it. I recognised at the time that you would need to put in quite a high investment in arranging the business cases, even though you didn't know that they were going to necessarily lead to successful bids. But could you just give us a total of what we expect to be coming out of the LTP and any other source? Because I can see 60s, there's 380s, etc. To get to the stage where we've got that full business case coming forward, what the number is on that one. I think it's probably for Richard, if that's all right, Vicky.
Yeah. Well, as you can see in the sections that you just referred to within the report, we're looking at a spend of circa £60,000 in taking our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan from stages 2 and 3 up to stage 5 for the bid. So that basically would provide us with a prioritised list of cycling improvements that are ranked in accordance with the LCWIP process, which DFT have specified would be advantageous as part of a bidding transforming city. And the other elements which are in there obviously total of circa £450,000, which relate largely to specialist technical advice from our framework consultants based on traffic modelling. So we have to demonstrate that we've East appraised and that we're in compliance with Government Treasury's Green Book. So we have to complete 5 business cases. So we have to complete a strategic, economic, commercial, management, financial business case, and as part of that process we've employed WSP, our framework consultant, to develop that, who actually have former DFT economists as part of their service. So that's essentially where we are in that respect. I'm not sure if you want any further clarification. There is a significant amount of officer time in there as well, because obviously in order for WSP to appraise and actually develop the business case, they need to have at least an indication of what types of interventions and proposals would be achievable within the conurbation. And obviously, officers in what were the sovereign authorities are obviously best placed to advise that process, but obviously they will need to be able to charge their time and be accountable.
So just to clarify, we're talking about, including officer time, probably somewhere around 5,000 or 10,000 would be the total spend on getting to the full business case. But before you answer that one, I'd just say if it is an amount, I'm going to be nodding along and saying that's something that I would fully support. I don't believe that that's a waste of any money.
What the report identifies is the amount. What it's trying to do, in so much as in being transparent, is obviously we've got a live capital programme, BCP's LTP capital programme. This report is referring to where money will need to be transferred from other potential areas to basically enable us to obviously compete with the other city regions. So it's for the officer time and the technical support. There are already fund allocations within the capital programme of BCP Council, which are for future LTP works. So, for example, where we're doing works on potentially the S6 corridor, which is a corridor which would come from effectively Christchurch up to North Pool. Any works that's undertaken on that in terms of outline design could effectively be charged or funded by another funding stream within the LTP. It's not going to be abortive work in any way, shape or form. And obviously what we're trying to do, just for, in terms of that resource, is that we want to be ready with all of the corridors as best as we can, so that if other city regions falter, we're there ready with plans available and can say to DfT, look, we've actually got these plans developed, we're ready to go. Please can you transfer to the South East Dorset City region and we will deliver.
Probably go back to Councillor Slade a little bit on this bit, but it relates to what you're saying here, Richard.
Councillor Green, if you do one or two more questions, and then I'll go to other members, and then maybe come back if you've got more.
I was actually going to ask for exactly that, if that's all right.
Yeah, we've got half an hour, so I want.
I just want to have a look at a bit of the summary risk assessment, and then I was going to ask maybe after other people have spoken whether I can come back and
very generous
look
of
at
you.
that. Thank you. Because I think so you are saying 510,000 basically is what we're talking about. And again, I'm very supportive of that, and I'm very supportive of the fact that getting almost spade-ready schemes is what other authorities have done better than historically than some of us, so that when that comes out, it's ready to go. I'm very supportive of that. I don't think that the paragraph on that one, which I think is 44, is quite fair, because what we do know is that if there's no big chunk of funding coming, then some of these works will be abortive. They will not. They'll never see the light of day. So I think I don't have a problem with it, because I think that the gamble effectively is worthwhile, and to have it ready and for additional funding, or to make sure that we've got the best possible case for getting the maximum possible money. So I think we just need to be a little more open about what that means, but I am 100% supportive of the approach. The one that I'll come back. I'll stop there if that's all right. But yes, if I can come back later in the discussion, please, Chairman, to talk in a bit more detail about a few things. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you, Councillor Green, for
Can I
thorough
just
analysis.
respond
yes,
to that?
Yes, please
I
do.
think that it might be prudent albeit at a slower pace of investment, might be a much slower pace of investment, because I think what the message there is that by getting to the spade-ready point, to use your phrase, is we don't know what potential future sources there may well, transforming cities too, may well happen. We don't know what the future holds in this world, and with the climate emergency having been declared by the former Prime Minister, and councils taking those things on board, it might be that in future more investment is done on this area of work. So it is probably a slightly optimistic view in paragraph 44, but I'd rather be optimistic than pessimistic.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. It might be helpful if the board draws their attention to page 243. Again, I don't know the machinations of government and the effectiveness of lobbying by MPs, and it's a bit of a world of mystery to me. But when I read a report that says that the Department for Transport has made it very clear that the focus should be on infrastructure, and that the other items which relate to our ambitions for climate change and so on and so forth, and modal shift away from the vehicles, away from cars onto bus technology, and I didn't pick up the fact that they said they're not funding trains, which is a disappointment. I know it will be a disappointment to a lot of people here for light rail. Is that I appreciate, and I think our job here is to look at risk, and in the time frames that we have, I think to put in the realistic bid, taking away the elements which the DfT have said that they're just not going to fund because it's not infrastructure. What I think it needs to be focused on is, if we haven't put those reports in there, we haven't accepted that this is what our bid's going to be, then the risk here is that we may well lose the funding that we have put a bid in for the sphere. So I'd just like the board to just sort of have a quick look at the fact that he's given a very, very clear steer as regards what they're going to fund, and I think the officers have done well to pull out component parts that actually focus only on infrastructure, so that the bids hopefully should be accepted by the government.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. I would just respond, not of Councillor Green, but also as somebody that's been involved in these bids before. And of course, the calculation of risk does work both ways. It's the risk of what you potentially miss out on as well. And I think the crux of some of the points that Councillor Green was saying is that many of us who have been involved in this before have experienced civil servants in a department telling officers in a council what will and won't fly. That is very different from utilising both the political ambition and also all of the political tools available to you to make sure that actually what you want happens, not what you've been told might happen, happens. And so I think that was where Councillor Green was getting to a little bit, is that have we explored all of the opportunities available? Because I can cite many examples where we've been told that you'll only get this, but actually if you're very ambitious you might be surprised what you can achieve. Councillor Cox, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment that I feel Councillor Green's pain when the local MPs haven't supported the council enough in terms of this particular area. But I wanted to comment about something you said about the difference in funding between West Yorkshire and Dorset. And are we not being not in a marginal area politically? And therefore the funding has been directed to marginal political areas rather than non-marginal areas.
Councillor Slade.
I couldn't possibly comment on why some areas have done a better job. That's really not something I can answer. All I can say is that the only MPs I have been able to have conversations with have been the two Bournemouth MPs. They have been extremely helpful, and it's been a long journey to try to get them to actually talk to us. I can't account for why that took a long time, but once the conversations have started, they have been very full. And I can just repeat that Mr. Burns' willingness to talk directly to Mr. Shapps around it is something which I find really positive. For those who don't want to talk to us, that's not something I can do a lot about. I can ask, but if they won't talk to me, then what can I do with that? And I have asked for the information so that I can make the best of that opportunity that is being offered. And I think we just have to accept that we are where we are. And I'm sure Councillor Green did a wonderful job in working with his colleagues, but perhaps if his colleagues were of a different political flavour, he might not have found it so easy to get through the door. And I'm doing the very best that I can to actually work with everybody that I need to work with, and will continue to do so, because at the end of the day, my job is to lead this council regardless of people's political attachment, and it's not always reciprocated by everybody else.
Councillor Cox.
One other question, if that's all right. I noticed in this report that the amount of money being spent on Christchurch, and excuse me, I'm a Christchurch councillor, it seems to be quite low. And I appreciate that this has been done from a Bournemouth-centric perspective, or Poole-centric perspective particularly. And I do appreciate that this is the start of the investment in transport in this area. But can I have an assurance that more attention will be given to Christchurch area in terms of, because I know certainly it is very high on the people of Christchurch's perspective. Thank you.
Councillor Slade, what about Christchurch?
Well, I would probably throw that slightly back to the members who were formally involved in creating the initial bids. Obviously, it was that County Council lead members and lead members in Poole and Bournemouth So I can't really comment about why that there wasn't as much going on with that side. I think the issue is around the key transport corridors to places like the port and the airport and the main towns, and where the biggest problem is with regard to congestion, pollution, and associated modal shift being needed. And therefore, with this level of government money, it is those corridors that have been prioritised for good reason. Clearly there are works to be done to improve the Christchurch to Bournemouth link, but it is that main one to the Port of Paul and out to the wider areas which the DFT are really keen that we improve first.
Thank you. We've got 25 minutes, so we'll keep speeding through. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. My question's a technical one, so it's really directed at the officers rather than Councillor Slade. In the report, the comments you made, you talked about the ducting for fibre optics not being considered as part of the report. I'm wondering whether you had considered using the fairly extensive city fibre ducting that was put in through Bournemouth.
Obviously, had DFT wanted to continue on that tact, then that's something that we would have explored. But as it was fairly early on, actually in March this year, when they launched the TCF process formally, it's fair to say there was a change in direction within DFT and the actual focus of the Transforming Cities Fund. So previously, it may well have been focused on technology, mobility as a service, etc., etc. However, DFT made it very, very clear they actually trying to install a network management system would not really encourage mode shift. What you do is probably add more benefit to single occupancy cars, and the focus of the fund is about connecting people sustainably to places of work from homes and thereby enabling growth.
Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going back to a more general point. It was mentioned earlier about this about risk, and I think actually just on the back on the chairman's statement, which I wanted to just follow up on, which I agree with. The risk also is of missing out, and I'd just like to just dwell on that and just make hopefully a fairly simple point. The word right at the beginning of this, ambition, was mentioned, and there is a whopping great risk here about our ambition, or not a kind of lack of ambition. I don't genuinely believe there's any lack of ambition, but almost like sort of a muted sort of ambition about this. I've listened, understood what's been done in difficult circumstances. It's also understood the different political makeup. But as background, I mean, I've just come back from a big event earlier on this week, and I don't want to hear any more about Midlands End and Northern Powerhouse, to be honest, because I've had my fill with all of that. I live down here, we all live down here, proud to live down here, and whether it's next year or maybe too soon or the year after that, at whichever conference, it doesn't matter, I'd like us to somehow be on a trajectory where whoever is up there talking about whatever we call this thing, and let's give it a name down here. Maybe I'm also agreeing, in a sense, with what Councillor Green was saying. The thing about having the regular meetings with the MPs is it's a detail, but it's not a detail in a sense, because it actually symbolises a campaign. And yes, a certain MP came, didn't turn up, didn't show, or whatever. But there's a campaign around this to have all of them engaged, and blow me, I'm not an MP, whatever, but just it must be in their own personal interests to be part of and to be seen to be championing an economic regeneration, a transformation on their own doorstep. It must be important for them as MPs to be seen to be part of this as well, a good news story. So first thing is an endeavour to actually have something regular with all of the MPs and focused on, whether we call it transforming cities or economic regen, something like that, and keep it going with all of them, even if they don't turn up. The second thing is, in all those areas of the country, many of whom have submitted industrial strategy submissions, they've also laboured with the problem, no pun intended, they've also dealt with the problem of having to deal with mixed entities in their vicinity of different parties. So we mustn't be using that at all as any reason for a kind of a muted campaign around this. It's got to be full on, and we've got to basically reach for the sort of the style, the oomph, the energy that I see earlier this week from those other areas of the country. You know, that's the kind of style that I think I'm very keen to see around all of this. So, sorry, not a question as such, but just is there any particular response you have to that?
Councillor Slade.
Absolutely. Andy Hadley sits on the Western Gateway Sub-National Transport Board and engages heavily on the work that we can do with them to actually boost this particular part of the country. I sit on the South West Steering Board, so there is a lot of work that's being done at a regional level to try to compete with the Midlands Engine and the Northern Powerhouse. I'm also working with the so-called Golden Triangle, with Southampton and Portsmouth, and also with Winchester, to try and look at how the southern central area can actually be promoted. So there's a lot of work that's going on. There's an APPD for the Great South West. I'm also the vice chair of the Key Cities Group, which I've got the portfolio for smart places. So I'm working with a cross-party with Labour and Conservative leaders across the country. So there is a lot of work that's going on across those levels, and there is a lot of ambition to put both the South West on the map, but also size cities on the map, competing against the big ones. The reflection is simply that in the early stages of forming a new council, where we've gone from a situation where it has been dominated by a group of people who naturally come together on a regular basis, to people who actually don't have the opportunity to do that quite so readily, at the same time as a national political crisis where the MPs are not actually functioning in the normal way. APPGs have been cancelled, meetings have been cancelled. Connor is now a minister, a leading minister travelling all over the world. It's actually incredibly difficult to force those things through at the same level than we might have done had we not been facing the national crisis that we are. But I would challenge the suggestion by anybody that we're not actually working hard enough to bring that together. At every opportunity I am raising those things, and we are incredibly ambitious about what we can achieve. The fact that we are continuing to talk about our high and our medium bids, and then we have 3 alternative low bids, is saying we still want those higher bids. Those that 73,000 and 117,000 are still there. No one's taken those away, but we're actually saying if they're going to take us down to the low bid, let's be ready for it, and let's make sure we can actually do it. Because for me, the worst thing would be to be in a position where we have a bid that we cannot deliver, and we're then not able to take up the money, or worse still, that we have to pay any money back. So I think the ambition is absolutely there. It's fair to say that had the outcome in May, which the public delivered, had been different, then the individuals who had started this process will have been more cited on it. So it is a rapid learning curve, and I think our officers have done a really good job in the time that's been available for it.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of weeks ago I attended a industrial strategy presentation, and I'm just wondering if there is any linkage or joined up work going on between what's going on or being presented in this paper and what the team producing the industrial strategy is, because there's clearly a lot of synergy between the activities of these 2 different groups.
So the local industrial strategy workshop, which a number of members in the room attended, is about what Dorset wants to be famous for looking forward, and it was really clear from that the ambitions are around things like light rail and other ways of linking our towns together. Certainly an improvement in the train network, and there is a lot of work going on with that. That's a piece of work that looks forward as an area. This is very much driven by a pot of money that's been granted in specific areas that is to one side. So they don't dovetail together. They are very much in parallel. This is a very short-term project, whereas the local industrial strategy is looking much longer term, and I think has different ambitions. You know, I share the disappointment that rail wasn't something that was supported by this particular fund, but I think we have to recognise that where a fund is set out with parameters, then we need to push those parameters as far as we can, and then look to the next set of opportunities to look at those parameters, and that's where I think the local industrial strategy is able to do that in partnership with people like the Dorset Local Enterprise Partnership.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, but clearly some of the issues that were coming out of the workshop we attended were very much about infrastructure changes, and in particular we were talking about the infrastructure to the harbour and to the airport in particular, and it seems to me that this is very much about some of those routes as well. A lot of this in here, sustainable transport corridors, etc. It plays a big part in what this work is about. So that's the reason I raised it. I don't expect any answers, but.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby.
Thank you. In a way, I suppose it follows on a little bit from what Councillor Bartlett was saying. With the bids that we're putting together, or the different options which we've got, they all seem to be being led, from what I can hear, by what the Department for Transport we feel as though they'd be most likely to support, rather than what we may see as most, if we had the money available to do what we wanted to invest in here, would we be putting it into the same projects as we're tailoring these bids towards? So if you could kind of talk around the actual benefits that there would be to the wider connotation of what we focused on, rather than it just being the way to get the money, which I'm very much in favour of, but if there's more benefits to sort of the local economy and what we're likely to see develop from it as well.
Councillor Slade.
So the Transforming Cities Fund is designed to achieve modal shift, which is something that as local councils we've been talking about for as long as I've been involved in local politics. And that's why the particular projects that have been chosen are the ones that are likely to have the biggest impact on that modal shift, in being able to get people out of their cars by giving them a real alternative, and looking at the doors where people's use of the bus, or people being able to cycle or walk, all or part of their journeys, is the focus of the attention. So by actually making those corridors more friendly for non-car transport, for actually developing a bus station, for making sure that bus priorities are happening, that the pinch points are eliminated, it is the outcomes for people that this project is about, rather than delivering an infrastructure change to the port or to the airport. This is about actually people living in their homes on the main transport corridors, encouraging them to use sustainable ways to get to those transport corridors from their homes, and then once they're on those transport corridors, to have a safe, reliable, sustainable and inexpensive way of getting a place of work, so those people who don't have those options because they need to use their car for whatever reason aren't suffering the congestion and the air pollution, so we can fulfil everything that we've said we want to do around a sustainable environment and improved health and well-being. So I think it is very much outcome driven, rather than improving a place, and that's why it's about the port or the airport. That the only element of it that is about physical structure is around the bus station, and that's because the DFT's view is that by improving that, it has the ability to encourage people to make different choices, but because of the limitations on time, that's why we've gone this. Okay, if that's not the vote, let's add additional corridors. I hope that answers the question.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman, and appreciate all the time felt, but as I said, it has been about 2 years of my life to get to the stage that we were at. So I think you can understand why I'll get quite into the weeds on it. But I'll try not to for this part. And I want to turn to, well, first of all, actually, sorry, can I make it clear to Councillor Cox about the comment with the MPs? Actually, the MPs were, the vast majority of them, very, very supportive and very important in getting us to where it was. It wasn't just Conor Burns and Tobias Elwood. It was particularly Michael Tomlinson. Once we started to involve Dorset, was extremely useful in it. And my criticism, if there is some, is not on the MPs for not getting involved. It's for the administration in not concentrating enough on this absolutely once-in-a-generation opportunity and making sure that they were demanding the meetings with all of those involved purely around TCF. I had the meetings with the MPs, I had the conversations with the MPs, I had the conversations with the Department for Transport, and I don't believe that momentum's been continued. And just to make it clear, I was previously a cabinet member in a different authority where we had MPs of a different party, and I found it very, very easy to speak with them. They'd had 40 years of Labour control. We then had a Conservative Lib Dem coalition. The Labour MPs were able to do it, and they were able to deliver in the way. So I don't see any problem with that at all. But to go back onto this specific one, I'm now looking at the low ask, and probably the easiest one to look at is page 237. When we put this package together, which is all in Appendix B, which was the 150 million, we did it because the intention to get onto the bidding, to get acted, was to show that we were doing something that was truly transformational. It was something which would affect a modal shift across the conurbation. We recognised the idea of critical size, but we also recognised the idea of critical routes. And so there are the six routes there. There are I think 6 or 8 transport hubs. And we looked carefully at whether chucking all the money in one would actually produce through the transformation that we required and the DfT and government were looking for. And we concluded that it would not. And that's why, if you look at Appendix B on page 219 and 220, when we looked at the corridors, the eight corridors, we were looking at £94 million. The biggest bids out of that were for the hugely contested Wallace Down Road, Talbot Avenue corridor, and also the Poole to Ferndown one. But the biggest of the lot was the Bournemouth to Ferndown and Wimborne one, which we felt needed the most money and would give the most benefit. And that was agreed by DfT informally. 15 of that 94 million that we saw was for the Poole to Ferndown corridor. When we now compare that with the bid that's gone in, 20.7 of the 21.5 million that's now being bid for is all on the Poole to Ferndown corridor, our sort of second and a half to third choice as to which was actually going to deliver the change that we needed. You've got exactly the same when you look at page 220, the 10 transport hub interventions that we were talking about. 31 million they added up to. 8 million of them was for Poole bus station, 8 million for Bournemouth bus station, 4 million for one, 2 million for the other, going on through that. Something that we felt that as a network meant that we were going to be able to achieve that modal shift that was necessary. When we now look at what's here, 24 million is going on one project and nothing at all on any of the other projects in those transport or pennies on the other actual hubs within there. I'm not suggesting in any way that spending that money won't have a great effect. But what I am suggesting, I would ask officers maybe if it's time to come back on, is why pick those two big ones rather than do as we did to try to get the agreement of DfT to try and effect the real modal shift across the conurbation that we required, to spread that around and to make it work for everyone in the South East Dorset City region and all the employers as well as the workers. That is how we were going to affect the modal shift and drive more and more people away from private car and into sustainable methods of transport. And frankly, I am not sure, well, frankly, I'm pretty sure that spending 24 million on one project, rather than being spread around amongst the 10, will affect that. So I am very disappointed to hear that 60% of what we now believe we may not even get anyway is going to be spent on the one corridor, Poole to Ferndown, and the one project, the Heart of Poole bus station, particularly when the Heart of Poole transformation or regeneration has actually just been pulled from the same agenda as we're looking at the moment. So I'm disappointed with that, and where it leaves me, and I'll finish by saying it, is that what was meant to be a really superb opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to affect modal shift accommodation, has instead become a focus on two projects, good that they are, but unlikely that they are to affect to manage what we actually wanted. So I don't feel that anywhere more is it's transformational. I'm disappointed about the engagement with the people who could make a difference, particularly the Member of Parliament, to hear that. So I think it has lessened the likelihood of a bid. And I have to say also, if I was sitting there and having been talking to DfT and to government, the one thing that they always did, with Bournemouth Council particularly, is they knew that we would deliver. If the money was available and it was there for a project, it would be done. And that's why we were able to pick up the extras that were coming through when somebody else didn't deliver, and we were right at the top of the list when it came to priorities for smaller level funding as well. The decision that was taken on Wessex Fields to cancel that when the money had all but been approved, Western Gateway, that you say Andy Handley now sits on, had agreed to prioritise that route. So both the LEP and the DfT through Western Gateway said there will be money available for your scheme. We recognise it ticks all the boxes that we wanted. The message that has now gone to those funders, the big funders, the people who are deciding on this as well, is we want your money, but we might throw it back at you later. And that, I feel, is almost certainly one of the reasons, this lack of certainty, why they have reduced down the possible availability of funds for this. It will continue to worry them as we go forward. And what I'd like to get from you, please, Vicky, is the absolute assurance that if and when we get the money on transforming cities, we're not going to be presented with the same sort of NIMBY reaction and therefore pull out of a deal where we've had the funding, because this is causing us damage, not just in the short term there, but we're already seeing it in this reduction in Transforming Cities Fund money, and I fear that the reputation that we built up so well over the previous decade or so is being stripped out very, very quickly with the sort of decisions and short-termism that's taking place at the moment. That is exactly what the DfT, the government, the LEP and the Western Gateway do not want to see.
Councillor Slade.
Well, I think that's an outrageous statement. Well, we're not here to talk about Wessex Field. We've discussed Wessex Field. It's completely irrelevant. You know full well that part of the field didn't have any funding attached to it. There may be there's a bid-in for part of the money. It's irrelevant. It's not about being a NIMBY. It's about whether it's the right project, whether in the climate emergency that is the right project. But that's not what we're here to talk about. And I don't think there's any relationship between the fact that prior to decisions on that, the DfT were subscribed by hundreds of millions of pounds and asked all of the cities concerned to reduce the size of their bids so that they were able to support the bids at a different level. The DfT also dictated which elements of the projects that they favoured and which that they did not. I'm going to ask Richard to come back on why two particular projects appear to have greater sums attached to them than the Appendix B showed, because that's a technical question. But I think the suggestion that the political direction changing in the last few months has determined this is completely unfair and unfounded. I'm not going to say anything further on that. Richard.
Okay, so just in terms of the overall picture with regards to the finances of the bid, obviously the 150 million, the expression of interest, has effectively got the South East Dorset City region through the process that we're to become a shortlisted city region. But I'm not afraid to say that actually delivery of a 150 million programme over 3 years on the conurbation's highway network would be completely unachievable. So for want of a better word, what we've had to do is look at what's actually deliverable. Part of the development of the business case, which has to be submitted to DfT, has to demonstrate management and commercialism. And in that respect, we cannot demonstrate to DfT that all the projects along all those corridors are deliverable within a 3-year period, which is simply would bring the conurbation rather, to a complete halt. So we've had to obviously pare back on that. With regards to Wallace Down, actually there's been DLEP funding, and there's actually a scheme that's ongoing at the moment that perhaps wouldn't have necessarily been in progress at the time that the Transforming Cities Fund bid was put together. There's also the MPIF funding on that corridor. So there's obviously the reason why that's not been included within the current proposal, because actually there's already other funding sources that are available to deliver along that corridor. I'm just trying to think what else you wanted covered in that. In terms of the selection of the Poole to Ferndown corridor, was that part of your question as well? Obviously, when it's east appraised and they're ranked, and obviously the benefits are appraised. In that particular bill, obviously we've got masses of employment along that corridor. We've got the housing, obviously within the Poole Town Centre, planned housing from Dorset out at Longham, housing in Merley, housing further out. We've got the Ferndown Industrial Estate, and when all those things are assessed and appraised and actually churned through the Green Treasury Book process, that's the corridor that's actually come out the highest ranked and most deliverable. As part of the LEP programme as well, there was some work commissioned a year earlier than on the other corridors as part of the Transforming Cities Fund. So as part of the LEP programme, there was a Wallace Down Ringwood Road corridor element. So those proposals along that corridor are actually more developed and more deliverable than some of the other proposals on the other corridor. So there's obviously we're trying to de-risk and actually deliver. So I think I'm.
Thank you very much. We are basically at the time limit, so I'll take 2 more questions. Councillor Green, Councillor Brooke, yes, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions coming back. I think I understand the fact that there is a feeling that what we were told the envelope has now got more pieces of paper in it, more people seeking for funding from the same bid. And so I would understand and accept that we've been asked to sharpen our pencils and reduce the bids. What I am therefore struggling with is that along the way of sharpening our pencils, the Poole to Ferndown Sustainable Talk Corridor, which does at 15 million pay reference to the housing at Longham and Bearwood that you were referring to, has gone from 15 million to 21, and that the 8 million for Poole Rail and Bus Station new connectivity has risen even in the lowest bid to 24 million. And I'm not quite sure how that sits alongside. We've been asked to reduce the size of our bids, and therefore I'm keen to know what prioritisation was given to those. And also, if I were sitting in DfT, the first thing I would say is this smacks of mission creep. So I would be very grateful for some assurance that that's not the case, and how we can justify increasing one project 3 times when we're trimming many others.
I need to refer that to Richard because it's about how the numbers have changed within the bid. So I think he's got an answer.
So you may have recalled from earlier when we were talking about the wider expression of interest that originally went in. It was more technology based, and the figures along those corridors are actually just for laying fibre optic ducting. in the majority. So that's why when they were originally prepared, the whole sort of focus of it has shifted in alignment with the FT's requirements. So when the Transforming Cities Fund was initially launched, it had very much a kind of technology angle to it, and there was the potential for obviously having like a, as I say, the original proposal was almost like a city brain that would control traffic around the network. So the expression of interest in that respect didn't really have any kind of transport interventions along those corridors that were identified. So we've almost had to, dare I say it, pretty much start again since March and actually explore what interventions we could actually construct and are deliverable within the timescales of TCF. And then we've appraised all of those and applied obviously the ranking to them as following the Green Book Treasury process has resulted in that corridor being the priority corridor. And just in terms of a single item for Poole bus station, what I would say is that obviously the work that's happened previously has presented an opportunity for there to be a new bus station within Poole. There aren't plans that have been necessarily approved, developed, appraised, etc. in other nations that are near shovel ready. Therefore, we can't really include those because we're not actually going to be in a position to be able to deliver those. Finally, what I would say in terms of local transport hubs around other areas of the town, there are 2 points on this really. One is the expression of interest was very much an expression of interest. There wasn't an incredible amount of substance behind some of those items. Okay, and secondly, in terms of the sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
Going from an expression of interest to a detailed funding bid.
Yeah, detailed funding bid. But also, sorry, I'm back on track now. There's a local transport plan element to this of match funding. So, for example, one of the proposed schemes, which is obviously again subject to cabinet and discussions with all of the councils, etc., would be for some bus improvements in other localised centres. But that would come out of the LTP match, which is obviously proposed as being, I think, 4.5 million over the next 3 years. So, for example, like Jervis Place, for example, where there's proposals, they would be delivered as part of this programme as well.
If it's brief, Councillor. Yeah.
Then I will make it an observation rather than a question I'd really like to ask. Had that been the response to a change of 20% somewhere, I would have found that a satisfactory answer. I'm afraid when the figure in one piece goes to 3 times without a full explanation of that, I am concerned about either mission creep or some transparency somewhere in there, and I really think we should have a greater sense of what that detail is about. This isn't a something in line with DFT criteria. This isn't just about a bit more of a planning requirement or a planning commitment. This is very significant. And in terms of the fact that we have less money than we were hoping for, I think we need to be absolutely clear about what the evidence for this is and what it represents.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Brooke now because we are 10 minutes over. So, Councillor Brooke.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. Quite honestly, I've been appalled at some of the political wrangling that's been coming out of this group, where we are supposed to looking at things in a unified, apolitical way. But also, I welcome this. Yes, I appreciate the angst that Councillor Green is going through from the work that he's put in the past. But we are where we are with very, very limited time left, and the request is that further work is done to produce the full business case. My one comment or concern is that whenever work is done to try to get modal shift through improving cycling, improving buses, it tends not to have a significant effect. I haven't seen too much reduction along the route between Poole and Bournemouth, where Poole did a lot of work on the local transport plan to improve the bus route, because what it ended up doing was also improve it for cars, so you don't necessarily get a full modal shift. Consequently, what I would hope the officers or Councillor Slade can tell me is that while this work is going on, and assuming that we develop the bid and we get the money, we're also looking at ways in which that development can be supported with additional infrastructure out of our own funding for perhaps increased electric points, charging points which are needed for increasing electric cars and reducing petrol-driven cars, but also ways in which we might actually reduce the car parking requirements within the centres, because that is where the attraction is to come in your car. So are we also, while this is being developed, incorporating it into a wider scheme of making improvements for that modal shift to get the best modal shift we can out of this and our own money?
Councillor Slade, if you want to answer with yes, of course, then that would be absolutely fine in the circumstances.
I will make it brief because I need to move on myself. I've been sat here for too long drinking coffee. There is a lot of work that's going on with our partners around how we can make our buses more efficient, how we can actually give them the priority that they need. They're asking for specific improvements that we might be able to give them some additional priorities over and above what's in there. The car parking review is about to begin. I think the scoping of that, I think, is possibly going to be reviewed by your next board because it's coming to Cabinet in November, and we would really welcome that being as wide as possible. For me, that's about talking about how this is part of the carrot. And I think you have to have the carrot first. You have to give people the opportunity to have make it easier for them to make the choices, and then say, well, actually, we've given you those easier options. Now it's going to be a little bit more difficult because we are going to look at where should the parking be, what should it look like, who are we going to encourage, how do we make it easier for people to make those switches in their journey. So the car parking strategy, trying to encourage the buses to go electric, providing the infrastructure, not just for electric vehicles, but even for mobility scooters. I've been approached with people saying, actually, there are lots of people who are trying to get around on their own, and there aren't the facilities to charge a mobility scooter, improving the facilities for electric bikes. All of those things form part of the wider picture that we need to do, but we need to do that within our own funding envelope and not this funding envelope. This will give us the chance to do those bigger infrastructure pieces we couldn't do on our own. And whilst it isn't perfect, and I was equally disappointed having read the £100 million report back in June and spending a weekend taking that in and getting quite excited about what the future might look like. I was equally disappointed in the summer to hear that that our chances of getting this major transformation have been limited. So I think we just have to look at them in tandem, and I would welcome everyone's involvement in that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slade. Councillor Green, we're done with questions. So
thank you. Yes, I'd like to make a move, if I may, please, which is that ONS ask Cabinet to reconsider the low-ask alternatives to ensure that the final ask genuinely represents the project, or genuinely contains the project, which will lead to the most effective modal shift for the conurbation.
Do you have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Williams. Any very brief comments on the motion in front of us? Recommendation. Apologies. In which case I will... We've got a recommendation to take back to Cabinet. We've got that, Jill. All those in favour, if they could show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
All those against? And any abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much, Jill. That recommendation is carried, and I will take that to Cabinet next week. Thank you, board members and Councillor Slade and officers, for your time. With the agreement of board members, I will adjourn now for 15 minutes to recommence on the rest of the agenda. Thank you very much. Right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second half of the Overview and Scrutiny Board of Friday, the 4th of October, in the committee suite in Poole. We've dealt with items 1 through 5. As I mentioned to board members earlier, and for the interest of those members of the public that have joined us, item 7, which is the scrutiny of regeneration-related cabinets, is no longer an item on our agenda. Those items were relating to the cabinet papers, which have since been withdrawn. However, I do intend to use that time available, should there be some, to explore a little more with members of the board aspects of the plan which we may wish to consider in further detail. So without further ado, we will go to item 6, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy. We have had a request for scrutiny of the current use of the BCP Community Infrastructure Levy, which for future will be here or known as SIL. It's much easier to refer to. And to receive presentation from the ward councillor who has brought this to our attention, Councillor Farr. So, Councillor Farr, if you want to just join us up at the main board, and then you can remain for the rest of the item just up here. We have had a number of requests to speak from various members of the public and community groups on this issue as well. So what I will do is pass it over to Councillor Farr to introduce the reason he's asked us to bring this to the board. We will then go to statements or points to be made from members of the public or community groups, and then open it up to a wider discussion. So I'll pass it over to Councillor Farr. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. As a newly elected councillor in May, I'm very keen to work with groups to help projects beneficial to the community that I serve in Kinston Ward. Since May, myself and ward colleagues Norman Decent and Lawrence Fear have been approached by several local groups applying for funding. Frustratingly, we've been told the Community Infrastructure Levy funds have been locked away and no applications are being currently accepted. One project sadly turned away is for a public access life-saving defibrillator. Defibrillators save lives by saving vital seconds before an ambulance can arrive on the scene. I feel it's crucial these funds are unlocked as soon as possible for the benefit of all BCP residents, not just my ward. I urge that BCP Council reverts to the previous system of allocating these vital funds as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farr. Just for a matter of clarity, whilst members of the board may know what the Community Infrastructure Levy is, for those that are not aware, this is a charge on new developments which can then be used by the council for community improvements. Technically infrastructure, but I think the word infrastructure has been widened. The predecessor authorities all had different ways of allocating those funds and enabling them to be spent on these community projects. I understand, to be very clear, this is not I don't think this particular item is to have a go about any future arrangements, because I think we'd all probably agree that a harmonised model across BCP for the allocation of SIL funds is something that we'll all agree to and be very welcome. However, that item is not due to be considered by Council until next year. And not only that, but I think that would only, even though that item is being considered in the early part of next year, that wouldn't come into force until after April next year. So I think the reason that you brought this to the board, Councillor Farr, is to highlight that the way things stand as we speak right now, there is absolutely no mechanism that we can see for what I believe is currently around £2 million of funds to be used in the community to be spent at all. Until April. So that's just a bit of background for those that aren't aware of the situation. So before we move to a wider discussion, I'll move to those that have requested members of the public to speak. So I'll ask Mark Elkins if he could come to the table first. Mark, it'd be really helpful if you could just give an indication of who you're here representing, and then I'll leave the floor open to you to say your piece. Thank you very much.
Hi, yes, my name is Mark Elkins, coordinator Springbourne and Eastcliff residents meetings. Residents of Eastcliff and Springbourne Ward have one of the highest police crime map figures for the BCP Council area.
These figures can be seen at police.co.uk, and if you put in your postal code, you will see the crime map figures for your area. Only Bournemouth Central Ward has higher figures, with Eastcliff and Springbourne Ward being on a par with parts of the Boscombe wards. Both Boscombe and Bournemouth Central have dedicated BCP Council street wardens, but Eastcliff and Springbourne have none. Rightly, residents of Springbourne and Eastcliff have requested at public meetings that I have organised on the 5th of February this year and a few days ago on the 2nd of October that they wish to have street wardens operating in their ward. There is funding available, although obviously we've just heard it's locked away, in the form of unused SIL property development precept earned by the ward in a previous administration, in the sum I understand of approximately 69,000. Clearly, part of this would offer a much needed resource to fund them to help drive down crime and ASB in the ward, antisocial behaviour, for those who don't know. This deputation by myself is supported by all three Eastcliff and Springbourne ward councillors, and also Sophie Ricketts of Operation Galaxy. I should point out that a major reason why the crime map figure is so high for Eastcliff and Springbourne is because it has a very high proportion of people with multiple issues in comparison to most other BCP Council wards. Unfortunately, if such people are not properly controlled via adequate resources, increased crime and ASB is a known side effect. Thus, street wardens would help with this, and by identifying offenders and will actually highlight the fact such offenders need much more agency help, be it, for example, drug rehabilitation or job advice, etc. The current situation is, of course, unfair on local residents generally. It has a destabilising effect on their general well-being and way of life. I think that's probably obvious. Although the crime map figures for Eastcliff and Springbourne are high, it is known from public meetings that there is a huge level of under-reporting, especially in relation to drug crime. And so street wardens would assist in tackling such drug crime and obviously identifying it further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elkins, for your point. Feel free to stick around. I'll bring another speaker on, and then you can hear the contents of discussion afterwards. I know you can't stay for too long. So next I'd like to bring up Mr. Whitehall, Graham Whitehall, who I believe has a statement to make as well. Thank you, Mr. Whitehall. And again, if you could introduce where you're from as well, that'd be very helpful.
Hello, Graham Whitehall, Treasurer for the Dorset Lake Residents Association. I'm here representing the members of Dorset Lake Residents Association. The association basically covers the areas of Lilliput and which borders then Parkstone, Penhill, Camford Cliffs area. We had an application some time ago for a village sign, basically, to be placed either side of the main road, Sandbanks Road, going through Lilliput. And that was a previous application which was refused, and we were told basically the reason for all of that is one of the officers of Poole Council had said that Lilliput was not seen as a recognised village or per se. We're still keen to do something about this because it is actually going to be quite a useful indication of Lilliput. The actual area, or the village of Lilliput, is a sort of vibrant sort of centre. It is well recognised on the Sandbanks Road there, and we feel it will also be very, very useful for tourists as well coming to the area. But it is just literally some funding from the SIL to actually help fund that. We have been in dialogue for some time with the council regarding this, and we were told that yes, there should be some money available for us, and it would come from the SIL fund. So we're basically in the same sort of situation. We're wondering whether in fact we are going to receive any funds for that. So it's a short and sweet one, really.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Exactly. And where to go in the meantime, I suppose. Yeah, so lovely. The final speaker I have from members of the public, I believe, is Mr. Allenby, Chris Allenby. Mr. Allenby, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for this opportunity to put our case towards the ONS board. My name is Christopher Allenby. I am a trustee, treasurer and membership secretary for Poole Quays Forum. Poole Old Town and Hamworthy East, surrounding the Twin Cells regeneration, is the area of Poole Quays Forum. A simple guide is to PQF to the boundary, is south of the railway line, including Sturt on Poole Town side, and north of the railway line on Hamworthy side. It's a large forum area. We formed in 2011 under the Localism Act, and we were approved by the Borough of Poole in July 13, and our neighbourhood plan adopted February 17. We became a charity in 2016, and we have over 500 members plus 200 interested parties and advisors. So it's quite a pool of people. We feel we are a voice of the community. And the rationale for PQF was to engender a cohesive community on both sides of the backwater channel, to achieve a better neighbourhood, and the incentive for neighbourhood plans under the Localism Act to have influence on how 25% of SIL funds would be spent on community projects in your area. The current SIL band to Twin Cells regen area, the reward is zero, and we are all volunteers. Our performance, we hold 5 meetings a year and have regular attendance between 80 and 100 people. The RNLI are very generous and provide us with facilities to hold these meetings and as a contribution to PQF. We have hosted developer presentations from Inland Homes, Carter's Quay, West Quay Marina, Richard Carr with Poole Pottery and Mittlesway Tower, Atlas Group, Sydenham's, Neil Grinnell Between the Bridges, and of course Gallagher's, which has been a brownfield site for 25 years now. Our recent speakers, Cotton, as everybody knows, Executive Director of BCP, and of course our last speaker was Graham Farrant, Chief Executive Officer of BCP. Our next speaker is due to be Debbie Fleming, Acting Chief Executive of the Royal Bourke and Christchurch Hospital. Poole Quays Forum, an area of high density. Poole Old Town has the highest density in the borough, and parts of the town are listed as an area of highest level of deprivation, as per Graham Farrant's report to presentation to PQF, September 16. East Hamworthy has a relatively high density residential. Poole High Street is on the at-risk register with Historic England, and we've been instrumental, along with BOP, as it was, in achieving a 1.4 million grant for the street. Twin Cells area, the centre of the area scheduled for the very highest density of up to 225 dwellings per hectare. Currently, the PQF area has approximately 8,000 dwellings. The Poole plan provides for an additional 2,500 dwellings in the Twin Cells site, an increase of 31%. 2,500 dwellings at zero SIL. Paragraph 1.11 of the draft charging schedule stipulates that SIL monies should be used to pay for many good projects, including open space, improvement projects and community sports and leisure facilities. SIL has already paid for Twin Cells Bridge, which was built in order to open up and develop the regeneration area. PQF consulted with the community and identified an area of public realm which would benefit from improvement. The Mape Square, next door to the Guild Hall in Poole. Together with BOP, plans were developed and planning permission granted in October 2017. PQF is unable to seek SIL funding outside our designated area, and have been advised that there's only £38,000 in our SIL pot, and there are no other monies available to proceed with the project. Broadstone Neighbourhood Forum are also unable to tap into the overall neighbourhood SIL pot. The quote from BOP August 18, the Community Infrastructure Levy Neighbourhood Portion Scheme will provide such needed support. 111 bids were received and 61 worthwhile projects were funded to deliver benefits in areas where development has taken place, spending in excess of £2 million. The need for SIL funding. At the final full council meeting of BOP, the decision was taken to zero SIL. The developers have been well aware that zero SIL had been planned for many years, but there's still no sign of developments coming forward. Whilst the rest of the borough enjoy access to SIL funds and spent £2 million on worthwhile projects, the residents of Poole Keys Forum are forced to accept zero SIL. We are working with the Planning Policy Department and hope that a paper will be presented towards the new council by the latest next January, where we hope the recommendation will be for a more transparent and fairer SIL.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitehall. A slightly different take on SIL as well, in that we want, not that we can't access it, but we want some more, and that we'll be sure to take that away. So we do have a final speaker, which is Mr. Sprackling. So thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Sprackling.
Start again. My name is John Sprackling. I'm the president of the Branksome Park and Camper Cliffs District Residents Association. I haven't brought any notes with me because I wasn't intending to speak, but Chris mentioned the £2 million. This was on the Poole website as a media release back in January. I'm not sure that even those funds have been spent. Two that I'm particularly interested in is one for 50,000 for the Bishop Aldhelm's preschool, and on the same list is another 50,000 for Arn, a preschool for Arn, and they're only just within striking distance of each other. So I think there needs to be some more control over where these monies are spent. My question is, I believe that communities are entitled to 15%, aren't they, of the SIL fund?
Yes. So 15%, I believe, to be spent in the community, not
that's right.
is the correct.
And my only other contribution would be, in the past, when it's been Section 106, it's been ward-based. I don't know whether that's the fairest way to do it, but on the other hand, in Branksome Park and Camper Cliffs, there's a huge amount of building development going on, and there's huge amounts of SIL being paid in pot. So I think we should at least have an opportunity to spend some of that. But I can understand other wards where there's not so much development would feel a bit peeved that they're not sharing in the pot. So I don't know how that could be reconciled, but we've got a desperate need to do something about speeding in Branksome Park and Camper Cliffs. It's a rat run for all those people who live in Poole and work in Bournemouth. And the average speed of traffic around there is our road, Lindsay Road, is like a Grand Prix circuit some mornings. So it needs to be, we'd like some funds to do a traffic survey. I think that's all I need to say.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Sprackling. My understanding, for what it's worth, is that part of the reason that Community Infrastructure Levy is only designated to the communities, the specific area where the funds are collected, is precisely the aim of the levy itself, in that the areas that have seen the most development will inevitably suffer the consequences or opportunities or whatever, and that's where, therefore, the money should be spent. So it would defeat the object, in my view, if the monies were taken and spent elsewhere, because they are for the communities that have very much been affected. Thank you to all of our public speakers. I do believe we have a few other statements from Residents Association which councillors are here to talk to. Councillor Iyengar, I believe you have. Oh, they've already been given. That's absolutely fine. Councillor Andon, I believe you have some comments from Queen's Park.
Thank you, Tim. I've also had a very brief comment from Mordan. But if I have a statement here from the Queen's Park Neighbourhood Forum, and if I read it out, I think this is probably appropriate. It says, on behalf of the Queen's Park Neighbourhood Forum, I should like to state my opposition to any proposal which will take away the very modest proportion of the community infrastructure levy from local application. I believe that neighbourhood forums are a valuable way of engaging the local community in planning matters and gathering community views, not just about what development is opposed, but about the type of development that can be supported. Neighbourhood forums are community-led, reliant upon people who live and work in a designated area to voluntarily give their time towards developing a neighbourhood plan. At the July Overview and Scrutiny meeting, recommendation about the call-in of planning applications was amended. This took away the ability of neighbourhood forums to call in a particular application where they believed that there were material planning considerations that they wished the local planning authority to consider. I was disappointed by this because I feel it was indicative of a lack of value placed on the community-led work of a neighbourhood forum. At present, 15% of the community infrastructure is available for influence at a neighbourhood level. This is not a huge amount of money, but is one of the very few incentives, other than pure altruism, to encourage people to get involved with the neighbourhood forum and to play a constructive role in development decisions. Within the Queen's Park area, our neighbourhood forum has had some informal discussions about how this might be applied in future, and one thing that has come up a number of times is about ensuring accessibility to Queen's Park. This is a valuable local amenity space. There's no pedestrian crossing to get to it, which puts off people with mobility issues, such as older people and also people with young children. I sincerely hope that BCP Council will retain a similar arrangement whereby neighbourhood forums, in particular, where there are formal designated neighbourhood forums, have control over a proportion of the SIL levy raised. Now, I've also had a comment, if I may, Chairman, from one of the ex-councillors for Moordown, because she's very excised by the fact that back in, I think it was January or February this year, they allocated some of the SIL money, which was caught up in PERDA, so they couldn't spend it for use on supporting the Moordown Community Centre. They gave £6,000 for seed funding to help Moordown Community Centre redevelop the toilets there and spend. They needed a total fund of £9,000. That's been held up. It was held up in PERDA, and it's now been held up by the current administration, and they have not been able to access that money to do to use the seeding for the toilets. And they're very concerned now that they may lose the 91,000 that they're aiming at.
Thank you very much. I think that deals with all of the comments we've had from the communities group. So just to bring it back to the focus, we've obviously had Councillor Farr bring this towards us. I think rather than focus on the discussion about what type of arrangement there should be for a more unified SIL arrangement when that paper comes, because obviously the board will be able to have input and discussion into that next year. I think the focus, as we've heard from Councillor Farr and Councillor Anderson just now, that there are a number of schemes that have already even been approved by predecessor authorities that are locked in the system. There's obviously the engagement of neighbourhood forums through neighbourhood plans that are struggling to get that access to it as well. And I think the reasonable request from Councillor Farr was either that the new scheme is brought forward very quickly, or actually just that interim arrangements are made, particularly just replicating what was there previously. So I'll open it up to the rest of the board for comments and questions. Councillor Bartlett and then Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chair. The question I've got is, on what basis and who has taken the decision to stop the existing arrangements for the other sovereign councils? Because it came as a bit of a shock to us in my ward when we discovered that we wouldn't have access to the SIL funds that we thought we were going to be able to get hold of. So I'd like to understand who made the decision, how it was made, and how it was then promulgated.
Thank you very much. We deliberately hadn't asked for the portfolio holder or specific officers to be here, because I didn't want it to look. I wanted it to be a positive discussion rather than a blame. But Tanya Coulter has indicated that she may be able to provide some clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just further to that question, and for members' information, you're correct in that a number of bids, particularly in Bournemouth, actually, I think prior to the 1st of April, were sitting there waiting to be allocated, and I don't know the reason why the panel wasn't convened before LGR took place, and when that, how that worked. But I do understand that in Bournemouth there are legacy bids and an amount sitting there, much more so than in Poole or in Christchurch, because we've been asking officers recently for an update on the amounts to bring forward information for you and for Cabinet and for the administration as well. So there is that situation that exists. The advice I gave over the LGR period, when I was asked by the officer managing that panel that considered it, was what do we do during the pre-election period, because I think it was just either pre or just post the election, when we had the shadow period. Can we convene that panel or not? Well, it was not, because it's member panel as well as officer panel. Wait until we get through the period, then we'll be in a position to decide what we at the time were assuming was going to be a unified review of SIL. And I spoke to one of the heads of planning at the time and said, look, we need to review the SIL arrangements at some point, as well as all of the other arrangements relating to planning going forward. And that has been on our list to do, to be perfectly frank. I don't think it's a political decision. I don't think any decision has been made to defer it or to consider it. It's been an officer decision on the basis of legal advice that we need to pause it at the time, and it's been something that we should have done. And actually, I think as officers we need to accept responsibility for that. And so I'm quite happy to do so. What we have, I think, since this has been brought forward, which has been really useful to your panel, is I have spoken to the head of communities and to Nick Perrins in planning, who many of you will know, to get a note as to exactly where we are in terms of the amounts, and we are looking at what we can put in place in terms of dealing with the legacy, because part of it is making sure that what we do is legally compliant, and it's painful, but it's true. And so we have got hopefully some options that we can put into place fairly quickly. I think we were hoping that as officers we'd be in a position to say, right, here's your new unified kind of SIL arrangement. This is going to be quite, pretty quick, pretty easy. Clearly it isn't, and actually there needs to be an awful lot of consultation with groups, because the preceding council's arrangements were so different, were significantly different. So there will need to be a lot of consultation around that. You may want to think about how you're engaged as a working group with Cabinet members on developing that. But in relation to the legacy, I totally agree that from an officer perspective, we need to be getting on with actually making sure that there is an arrangement set up that then, the politicians can then confirm it is agreeable. And that is certainly what we would hope to do, based on the Lead Council's positions. On that basis, hopefully legally we can say, yeah, we can just progress with as we were, and we're not going to be caught in any challenge to that, and that's the reason for the delay.
Thank you, Tanya, and sorry to put you in the hot spot here.
No,
Councillor Barton, you wish to
fine.
come back on that point?
Clarify that.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Now we're away from the election period, is there any reason why we couldn't carry on with what were the excellent arrangements for SIL until such time as the paper comes forward to see how it will be handled in the future?
I don't think there is, and I've committed to coming back next week and confirming that, because it was ward-based. We have new wards and we have new boundaries. So long as we have a process in place that clearly reflects the preceding arrangements and areas, and make sure that that's absolutely covered, then we should be able to do that. But because that was the concern at the time, not that there was an election and then it was taking place, but we had wholly different systems, and the Bournemouth system was based on wards that no longer exist and borough boundaries that no longer exist.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kelsey.
Thanks, Chairman, and thank you, Tanya, for your honest answer there and for virtually taking the blame for what's on. It's really nice to hear that someone can own up to when officers make misdemeanours, as we shall say. I'd also like to thank Councillor Farr for bringing this to the attention of everyone. I think it's a really, really good point. But more so, if I can just say thanks to Mark Elkins, who looks after Springbourne and Eastcliff for us when it comes to residents' associations and things. And he's quite right. We had a massive meeting the other night, and it was top of our agenda, and it has been for as long as probably both of us can remember in doing all these. My ward probably suffered from the most amount of development over the last God knows how many years. Hence, we have £69,000 sat in our still funding from previous developments. And our whole idea, as Mark has stated, was to try and employ our own street wardens. I know 69,000 wouldn't cover the cost of that for a long time, but if we can get on top of things with that funding, it's certainly going to make a huge help and a huge difference to local residents. We've already found it. We funded a lot of things in the Niverton Garden areas where the residents took back control of Niverton Gardens. We've got rid of the druggies, we've got rid of the drinkers. They're not there anymore. We've now got families using the area again. So it proves if you have this local funding in place, you can change the way your wards are, and you can change the way that people think about them and how they want to live in them. So I'm really grateful for Tanya's explanation, and I do hope that in the next 2 weeks, Tanya will come back to us all and say, we're going back to the original way of doing things for the time being. Understand that we have to change it and make it borough-wide. That goes without saying for everyone, I think. But if we can just go back and release the funding, then all of the wards in the areas can go back to doing what their communities want them to do, and just give them that little bit of cash to help them move on with things. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Listening to the comments from the residents, and I appreciate their time and communicating with us, I've picked up two differences. One is the current position, and the other is looking to the future. And if I can just make some comments on the current position, following on from what Tanya has actually said, I've been given to understand that the head of service, who's responsible for the area, has been instructed to release the money that's held according to the preceding council's position and situation. So that would cover Councillor Farr's issue, assuming what I've been led to understand is actually correct, that the money that was collected and schemes promised under the old councils, that money should be being released and should be available for those schemes. And because it is based on the preceding council and the original wards, there should not be an issue. It does need checking, but as I say, that's what I've been led to understand in my preparations for this afternoon's discussion.
Just if I may just respond quickly on that, and you may wish to add the leader, Councillor Slade, to catch me before the meeting to say that she'd just been made aware of this and was not happy with the arrangements and would be looking to push forward a solution. So I think we have an open door that we're pushing at here, but she did say to me that she had understood that nothing was happening and that she would be looking to correct that. So it might well be that one person is saying what should happen, but it doesn't seem to be the case that is what is happening.
I appreciate that, Chair, and that's why I said I have been given to understand. It may be that the actual decision to push ahead has not yet been made, but I was given to understand that the head of service had been instructed to release the funds for those monies and schemes that have been collected prior to. So that would clearly need confirmation, or if it hasn't done, you are pushing on an open door for it to be done. It then raises the next issue about the money that has been raised in the interim between the formation of the Shadow Council and the formation of this council, as to what happens with the money that's been collected there. That, I think, is a separate issue because it's sitting there, but there may be no schemes for it, but the money does need to be spent, to be used in the communities. And then we have the situation that money is being collected now, and we are still, we either have to continue to work on the old policies until a new one fully harmonised comes into place, which won't be until next year. So I would assume that we would continue, as with all other services are doing, that Poole operates its Poole system, Bournemouth operates its Bournemouth system, and Christchurch operates its system. I can't see an alternative adage. So that's in terms of the current position and how I perceive it, and my experiences with SIL since 2012 and 2013, when Broadstone Neighbourhood Forum was established. Can I move on to the idea of the harmonisation? I think it is absolutely vital that points made by Mr Sprackling and also Mr Allenby, and Mr Allenby in particular with Poole Keys Forum, 25% of zero SIL is zero money. And therefore, that in itself is unfair when an area is actually potentially going to be the area that sees the greatest amount of development. Secondly, I think the Poole scheme compared to the Bournemouth one is totally unfair in its allocation. Because neither Poole Keys Forum nor the Broadstone Forum, both of which have got neighbourhood plans, and our area in particular has little or no development, so we have very, very low amount of SIL coming in, have not been allowed to bid for the big pot. There have been other wards, either through councillors or through officers, where schemes have been put in for that big pot and have had several pedestrian crossings put in their area, sums in excess of £100,000 at a time, which means that with those areas where actually there has been little or no development, they have got money which far exceeds 25% of SIL, and they haven't even got a neighbourhood plan. So there's a real discriminatory element to the SIL allocation as it has been operating in Poole. And it is absolutely critical that points like that are taken on board in the review and how we are going to move our way forward. Most authorities, as I understand it, operate on a ward basis in terms of the allocation. Members may have to bid for the money because it's held centrally, but the idea of SIL was to mitigate against the development that was taking place in that locality. It replaced the S106 monies, which did exactly the same thing. The money was supposed to be spent within the ward. Consequently, unless it's seen as a whole conurbation scheme or a whole Poole scheme or a whole Bournemouth scheme that's being introduced, the money should be spent my view is that the SIL money should be collected and used within the ward according to the level of development and the monies that are coming in. That is the fairest way because it gives you the money to mitigate against the development that is actually taking place. So that's how I would like to see it go forward, but it also means we have to review the allocation of SIL in the planning system to the various areas such that no area ends up with a zero SIL. Otherwise they are going to be left totally out of the picture for mitigation against any development that takes place in their area. So that's my view, my contribution to moving forward, also to try to ease and resolve the situations that have been brought to us by the other councillors. And I may want to come back later. At the moment, that's me.
The point of order, Councillor Anderson.
Do you think it would be appropriate if we made a move to...
I think we need to let the discussion continue.
But all I was going to say is I'm quite happy at a suitable point of the time to support Councillor Brooke and either propose or second his motion if he wishes to make on that proposal.
Okay, I think let's see how the discussion goes before we necessarily preempt. But I do welcome your valuable contributions, Councillor Brooke, and I think it does draw into the larger discussion that we are having with Cabinet as well about the process and the ability of this board to be able to influence and add value to some of these items going forward. I think it would be unfortunate if we got to a position when this item comes to Cabinet that it's landed on us, and then we have 4 days to have any input over it, and there may well be points that we wish to draw in and it's kind of just too late. As you heard in my response to Mrs. Bracklin earlier, I completely agree. The point of the SIL money is to be spent on the area where the impact has been felt by development, and I think that should be a golden thread that runs through it. But I would hope and expect that this board, and indeed other consultation, happens prior to that Cabinet paper. I have had that discussion with the leader, who I think is in broad agreement with that. We just need to iron out how that works forward. And you wish to come back on that point?
Just absolutely agree with you on that, totally. And I think the leader is on board with a review to make such that things come out and work out in the fairest possible way. Can I just raise one other point? And then I'll shut up probably for the rest of the afternoon.
It's something about the mics today, it turns out. So not about these. Okay, carry on, Councillor.
And that is, as I understand it, in terms of mitigating against the development, what one is actually looking at is capital schemes, one-off schemes that you develop, which, when we think, and I have every sympathy with Councillor Kelsey and Mr. Elkins in terms of the issue, but I am not sure that the SIL money is the appropriate way to go forward, because what you're looking at with a street warden essentially is a revenue situation, not a capital situation. And I don't know how SIL operates in those circumstances. I'm just raising that question because potentially it could, if we went down that way, it could take us down the wrong route in terms of the allocation. It's just a word of, I don't know, but it's a question mark.
Thank you very much. It is a valid point for exploration in the future. Again, my understanding, as I mentioned earlier, is that the meaning of the term infrastructure has been loosened within the SIL for precisely the reason that government is encouraging us to think about outside the box into what constitutes infrastructure, and it's more about its impact than necessarily only build a road or a roundabout or whatever. But I think that's a valid point to make. And again, if we have that input, hopefully we can press that forward. I have other speakers. Councillor Iyengar.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few points I'd like to touch on here. Thanks again to my ward residents, Mr. Whitehall and Mr. Sprackling, for their comments. The first point is I think that this should be an emphatically good news story for the Council. That's what it should be, all of this. Responsiveness, speed, local initiative, local fast response, and almost kind of an embodiment of a local government moving as dynamically as anything can in the private sector. And it's not quite working out that way at all, and we've gone into a stall on this one. Personally, just the distinction between whether things should be a capital or sort of like a operational type of thing. I prefer almost like to not worry about that distinction at this time. I'd rather we had a problem of lots of projects of all different types, of different flavours, not quite knowing how to categorise them, but just know that they came from the heartfelt wishes of people, and of course they passed a certain test for worthiness, and that they were actually funded, and maybe 1 or 2 years down the road we started to finesse it by saying, okay, what have we had, what have we got, and how can we segment it? But almost let's not try and do all of that way too early, because we'll just put more steps in the whole process. And a similar point applies to my feeling about the harmonisation, because while I do understand, yeah, we ought to, the last thing I want to see is that this is tabled for winter into spring, and then with some other worthy things that we've talked about, in this board, for instance, it gets moved. It gets moved through 2020, and it goes another year before it's sorted out. I'm really seriously worried that this kind of thing will be backburnered by other things taking its place in the schedule. So just keep that in mind when we think of the harmonisation. What this should be about is speed and local responsiveness. This is a great sort of trust, in a sense, that people come up with ideas, in a sense, have the best interests at heart of their local community, and the Council should be showing responsiveness fast to it. Okay. it's only small amounts. I know certain things can get into the thousands or even tens of thousands, but compared to some other things that we do, these are only small amounts of money, and therefore the speed and the scrutiny and the turnaround should reflect the fact that it is small amounts of money. Okay? The final thing I want to talk about is that is about this ward basis. I'm in a ward, Camphor Cliffs ward, which includes Branksome Park, Sandbanks, half of Lilliput, Camphor Cliffs, of course, which, of course, is slightly one of the more better off parts of the whole BCP conurbation. Therefore, it doesn't mean we don't have needs, but it means they're just different needs. So bear with me, I'm, of course, a board member here, but I'm talking for the moment as a ward councillor. But it means just the needs are there. They're just different ones, because we do have a large element of loneliness in the ward. We have several issues to do with noise, party houses, beach maintenance, events, travellers, and the whole lot. And even though we are a ward where we have the same number of residents as any other ward, we are arguably one of the most visited wards by Poole, Bournemouth and Christchurch residents, and a whole load of other people from elsewhere in the country, and indeed the word. So the pressures that come from keeping the ward and the residents content with that influx of people, I'm sure is not lost on anyone in this room. No one, for your reassurance, no one in the ward has ever said to me crassly that all the sill generated by developments in my ward should stay in the current ward. And I'm glad no one has said that, and I don't believe that either. There's got to be a sort of a more of an even-handedness about this. But I think I would confidently say if a graph was drawn of all the wards and basically was contributed by developments and where was the spend, I think my ward would be so askew on that one, and I'd love to see it balanced up just a little bit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your points, Councillor. Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. For some of this discussion slightly out of our comfort zone, because mostly we start talking about how there isn't any money. And what we're talking about here is where there is money. And I'm very conscious of the point that Councillor Brooke raised about when there is no money in those wards, and that's very much an issue for some wards. But what we are talking about here is the frustration of members of our community, our residents, at not being able to get hold of money which rightfully sits within those communities. And I think it really behoves us to do everything we can to unblock where those monies have been held up. It really is unforgivable for money which belongs in the community to be tied up somewhere because we haven't perhaps got the right governance arrangements in place. So I really urge more power to our elbow in moving things forward, and I'm very pleased with Councillor Brooks' suggesting how we might take it forward. Just one point that I would like to make alongside others is that Messrs Elkins, Whitehall, Allenby and Sprackling have all given us some really good examples of where there are residents' bodies, whether they have a local plan or they don't, who have that kind of mature setup and are able to be bidding. I just point out that along with every other inequity that we've drawn across the conurbation, not all wards are like that. Not everybody has a thriving local area forum, which is the right body through which to push this sort of decision making. So I would just ask that whatever the local structure, that ward councillors are always involved in and asked for their input in driving the ward. It's certainly how we started the system in Bournemouth, and where it has worked, I think it's worked very well. So I'm very, very pleased that Councillor Farr raised this issue, and I hope likewise to be driving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to echo Councillor Iyengar's point about money being spent in the ward only. And I go back to the strategy is that it should be directed to those that it's affected. So if there's development, it should go to those affected. That's not necessarily people in the ward. That could well affect people outside of the wards and neighbouring wards. And therefore I would prefer if it was done on that basis rather than a ward-only basis.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Farquhar.
Thanks, Chair. Excuse me. I've got a resident. I'm not making a it seems an ideal opportunity with a discussion about the equality and the equalness. I've got a resident and a friend within the BCP conurbation who has disabled members in their family and is a disabled activist, and raised a very good point under the Equalities Act of 2020 that the public bodies have a part to play in making society fairer by tackling discrimination and providing equality of opportunity for all. There's a specific thing which we have listed on our BCP website, which lists the 29 outdoor play areas that are available in the conurbation, of which only 2 of those are actually listed as being accessible for disabled children. My question or my point would be is that I hear talk about XYZ percentage that's available to the SIL fund for local communities. Is there an opportunity in this review for the percentage of the SIL which is not available to the local communities to address the inequality that we have in our play areas and our accessibility for our disabled residents?
Thank you very much. It's certainly something that I would imagine that we will try and feed into the discussion and remember that point. As somebody that spends a lot of time in play areas then, but with 3 young children, having spent a lot of time, I completely agree that they are quite often the heart of the community as well, so a real positive benefit of development. Councillor Brooke again.
Just for clarification, the SIL money, let's just say there's £100 raised, for example. 15% of that, so £15, would go to the ward. The other 85% remains with the council to allocate and distribute as it likes, and therefore the authority would be expected to develop schemes that are predominantly community, wider than the ward, that everyone can actually benefit from. So you're looking at a specific amount for a specific ward and specific area, and then a very, very much bigger pool of money that can be spent by the authority on either bigger schemes or feeding back into those wards that perhaps are not raising any money at all. So it isn't quite as Councillor Anger and Councillor Cox were implying, I think, from the statements that they made. I think you need to look at this in 2 separate packages, a 15%, or in the case of neighbourhood forums, 25%, and then the bulk and what can be done with the bulk.
A very valid clarification. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come back on the comments about the Eastcliff and Springbourne spend. The Queen's Park ward, we're looking at spending some money on supporting the Charminster Street pastors. We took advice on how we could fund this. And the advice we were given was that we could certainly seed fund them. So we were looking at purchasing equipment for them, giving them some sort of start-up money and various information and funding that allowed them to effectively set up. Unfortunately, that never occurred because we were caught up in the earlier discussion with the board not meeting and then it being caught up and suspended. So I do look forward to us coming forward with a spend on that, but if it helps, I know that the money can be used at least for seed funding.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Lawton.
Thank you. Can I thank Councillor Farr for bringing this to the committee? Excellent work. And can I thank the gentleman over there who made the presentations? Well done. Just a quick question for Tanya. Tanya, can you tell me, is this similar to the 106 agreements whereby if you didn't spend the money in a certain amount of time, the money had to go back to the developer? And the other point I wanted to make is that I think Councillor Farr raised a very good point. At Every Head, for example, which has 1 million visitors a year, it certainly should have a defibrillator there, because there's quite a significant number of people who visit that area, and we as a council, as BCP Council, should be providing that. Some of these groups who are waiting for monies fall in with our equalities policy, which the leader mentioned earlier on, in that we have a number of people of single parent families, ethnic groups, who are all waiting for significant amounts of monies to assist them in their community and community forums. So if we can facilitate as quickly as possible, if we have to use the existing policies, I don't see anything wrong with that, to try and facilitate and release this money as quickly as possible, because there is a certain amount of frustration building up within groups, frustration against us as councillors and as a council, in that we've made certain promises to release money and to give money, but it's not forthcoming. So I certainly support anything that Councillor Brooke has said earlier on. He's made some really good points, and I think the sooner we can crash on with this, the better.
Thank you. And Tanya?
My understanding is not, but in any of as you've said, the aim would be to move on with on the preceding council arrangements, pending the review of the longer term, which will need to be obviously extensively debated, because some of the issues that have been raised today sort of highlight the issues that are in issue, and there are others, I'm sure. But no, so we will move forward, and there is a difference between the amounts that were collected and already allocated prior to the 1st of April, as Councillor Brooke has said, the amounts that were collected prior to the 1st of April that haven't been allocated and that bids are in, and then amounts collected since as well. We'll be working on the basis of the preceding council arrangements, with any checks and balances around that we need to put in place. As I understand it, that's where we want to get to, but we'll confirm that over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. I've got two more speakers, and then we'll draw this to a Councillor Lawson.
I think it's, the committee or the ONS panel should be aware that the monies available is quite significant. For Poole, it was about 10 million. For Bournemouth, it was about 2.7 million. And for Christchurch, it's about £800,000. So you're not talking about small amounts of money.
Just in relation to that, for the correction, so that may well be the overall SIL money, but the differences I've got up to date at the moment are sort of around the 400,000 mark for Bournemouth on the neighbourhood fund, and a lot of that is pre 1st of April, because the panel didn't meet and allocate that. For Christchurch, which dealt with through the parish council, so it's different in any event, it's around 60,000, and Poole around 50,000, but some may have been collected since then, but that's the interim figures that I've got. So it's that sort of amount, not the millions. Because that be the overall? So, I think
if from a clarity point of view, however, we still
don't given to me by Graham.
We still don't have we still don't have apologies. We still don't have the ability to be spending the SIL money, which in total at the moment is totalling up to nearing 15 million. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
I don't know the figure for the full SIL pot, and I've just got figures for the neighbourhood portion. That is held on the preceding council basis.
If it's very brief, because I do have other speakers wishing to.
I believe that the Heath Executive money is top sliced from the SIL. Is that still being allocated? Heath Executive, the Urban Heath funding. Yeah.
My understanding is that it is, but I'll clarify that point. It's not something I've got a briefing on today.
Thank you. I've got two more speakers, and then we'll draw this to a close. I've got Councillor Rigby and then Councillor Mike Green.
Thank you. Just two things. The first being I need to leave at 2 o'clock, so if I just stand up and walk out, it's not to do with anything anyone said. Secondly, it's more about looking at SIL in the future and the way we develop it. And we're talking about fairness and the distribution in the wards, and that wards are getting 15% of the SIL money. But in that case, without development, some wards are actually getting nothing. So it may be a way that wards being, in some cases, arbitrary lines, which we are drawing or bound by, that we could have a system whereas in a certain radius within a defence, and any wards which it touches could get a percentage of the money which is going into that. Because speaking from a ward councillor perspective, there's a lot of development at Talbot campus which impacts a lot on Winton East because of more traffic, more students, things like that, where we don't see anything from that. And also you've got areas like Bournemouth Central, which has a huge amount of development and impacts the surrounding wards as well. So it may be that it's fairer to split between all the wards that are surrounding that development rather than just directly in the ward itself.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got to slightly change what I was going to say because of the comments from Councillor Rigby. I think, and just in response to that, I think we do just need to remember that what we're talking about here is, depending on whether there's a neighbourhood forum or not, this is 15 to 25% of the SIL that's collected. The further, approximately 82%, I think it is, 83%, is given, that is the council's responsibility, and that will then be used for maybe the same wards, maybe other wards. It will be to address the needs of BCP as a whole. So I don't know that there is a need on that. But I was very taken with what Councillor Brooke was saying about, and I think the thing that we do all agree with, we won't necessarily agree how to do it, is that we want to try and do it in a fair way. And you touched on it, Chairman. There is a danger in the present way that we do it that we'll be presented with a proposal and then have 4 days to say what we think about it. So my real question, building on what Councillor Brooke was saying, I don't think it's right that we have a move at the moment or anything, because we haven't had the chance to discuss it. But how can we as ONS make sure that we feed in sufficiently and beneficially to the discussion as to how the local SIL should be, the neighbourhood SIL should be used? I don't know whether it's a subgroup to do it or whatever, but I think maybe it's something we should take away now and come back next time or the time afterwards and just make a plan amongst ourselves as to how we want to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I do have an unusual suggestion, which is a recommendation from the Chair, which is a listening to all of our points today, and let's all be honest, we've just been talking about how much we agree with each other on many of these things, which is great to be in that position. But, I have had the discussion with the leader today. I do think this is something that we can probably bring forward. Equally, I think it would be good to formalise it. So I would suggest a two-pronged recommendation from the board. The first one is that the board recommends an interim arrangement be brought forward as a matter of urgency to access the current SIL funding. The second one is that the Cabinet commits to work closely with the Overview and Scrutiny Board in the further harmonised arrangements of SIL funds in the future. I think that sums up the 2 points that we've come up today. I think it will be well received. Councillor Green.
Could I just suggest that the word harmonised suggests outcome, which has already been predetermined, and I don't think we should. I think I'd take the word harmonised out of that. We know where we want to get, but
future arrangements.
Future arrangements.
So, do I have a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Mike Brooke. So I will take that to the vote. All those in favour?
That's no.
First time of many. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for members of the public. Hopefully that's helped. Thank you for your time, for bringing it to us. I think it's been a really positive discussion, and hopefully we can start unlocking forward. And we would welcome your input as and when we start to look at the future arrangements as well, because feedback from the community will be vitally important. So thank you very much for coming. Members of the board, we have a little bit of time left, more time than we'd envisaged because of the two final reports not progressing to Cabinet. Therefore, with your permission, I will distribute to all members of the board a copy of the... Is it our floor plan or Cabinet floor plan?
So, members, I think you were asked to bring along your agenda for the 7th of October, which has got a copy of the ONS forward plan on it. But I have got some here. If you need, I've also got copies of the Cabinet forward plan for those that would like a paper copy. Okay, so if I pass those round that way, that's Cabinet.
So we do need to, I think, first of all, look... Thank you very much. I do think we need to do two things. You too? See you after. Thank you. Fine. Well, the less chatter, the more we can get through. I think we've got two things that it would be useful to do. First of all, the more immediate concern about the next but one meeting, because obviously we have a meeting on Monday for which the agenda has already been agreed. So first of all, to look at our early November board meeting and items that we wish to consider on that. And then secondly, maybe to have a little bit of time about separate to items which are coming on Cabinet, areas that we may wish to take the lead on. So if I go to the November board meeting first, we have been advised by Cabinet that the date for the 13th of October is now unlikely to be the date that Cabinet will be held. So there is a bit of a question mark as to when our board meeting will be, because obviously it is directly reactive to Cabinet. I don't know whether we have any further clarity.
Sorry, I haven't got a confirmed date for Cabinet as yet.
Okay. So if we work on the basis that November at some point we're going to be having a meeting, the Vice Chair and I had, looking at the Cabinet forward plan for the November meeting, highlighted what we thought would be the items that would seem to be the most useful to bring to the board. So if I run through those and either get nods or unanimous cries of no way, and then if any other items wish to be brought forward for consideration. So we had looked at the items, the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Action Plan. I imagine that's something that the board want to look at. Yes? I think so. Great, so that's a tick. The Smart Places Strategy, which is to seek approval to develop business case and options and continue with the LET project to develop pilot in Lansdowne. Again, I think that's something that we will want to look at as well. So unless I hear any no's, we'll go with that. Organisational design and transformation business case is obviously the next steps for the recommended option for the future design of the council. So I think it's that we'll be needing to look at that in some detail. We have put provisional times around these as well, so we've suggested we'll probably need an hour for that one, probably 30 minutes for the Smart Places strategy. Budget and performance monitoring report we are taking as a matter of course. We've allocated about 30 minutes for that. The corporate performance management update, which is a quarterly update on corporate performance. I think we actually have to look at that. I think there's a statute in which we have to consider. So again, we've allocated 30 minutes for that. Question for the board. The next two items that we were looking at considering were the adoption of the Falmouth, Christchurch and Poole and Dorset Waste Plan and also the Mineral Sites Plans. What are the board's feelings on the whether we want to look at those? I'd put them on the agenda, thinking that... As far as I understand, that these are the main modifications which are recommended by the inspector to be accepted. Kate may be able to give us more of an inkling. Thank you, Kate.
Hi. Both of them are Pan Dorset major planning documents that have been over a number of years with the preceding authorities contributing. They're working their way up to final adoption. So this is the stage after the inspectors looked at the plan and had some modifications. To be honest, at this point in time, it's quite hard to make substantive changes. So I think there's always a debate in my mind about the purpose of lots of scrutiny at this point in time. But I'm sure you all will know that from your previous considerations of plans after an inspector's report. It might, however, be helpful to bring them up more in the collective visibility, because they have been a bit below the radar for probably a few months now.
Councillor Brooke and then Councillor Kelsey.
Chair, would we not better use our scrutinising the preceding item, which is the family support and early help strategy, including youth services?
I believe that's for another panel. That will be for the Children's Services panel, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, Chairman, I spent years sat on the Dorset Minerals and Waste Strategy going back to 2000.
My commiserations, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, you're quite right in giving them to it. It has to be the most dullest meeting I've ever sat through, and in 12 years I don't think we've ever made a single decision. And the fact that it's now gone to the inspector, I think we should let it go to the inspectors. All we need on that, in my opinion, is maybe just a one-page written report with an update. It's not something we need to sit here and discuss for hours and hours, because it's been done for years and years anyway, and it's gone through all pre-councils, both Christchurch, Bournemouth and the respective portfolio holders on those cases would, and I'm sure Mike and Mark, who have also sat and would agree, it's something we've all agreed with and doesn't need a great deal of debate over.
Thank you. So the summary is, despite your wild enthusiasm for those,
we don't need to talk about it anymore.
Does anybody vehemently disagree on the board? Fine. In which case we will not be considering those, and therefore all responsibility, should they be wildly different, is now firmly on the shoulders of Councillor Kelsey. And the final item that we were looking to consider is the community engagement strategy, which again I think is something I've unallocated around an hour for that for the board meeting. Is there anything that jumps out at any board members for the November cabinet that we haven't considered? I haven't put onto the board the fleet replacement funding strategy. Are we all happy with that? That we don't wish to look at that as a board? Councillor Nicola Green.
Thank you, Chairman. So I was just you said, might there be anything else? Just wondering, we're not confirmed when the date of Cabinet is going to be, and therefore I'm concerned that we might not be confirmed about the agenda of Cabinet. There are 2 papers which have been pulled sine die. Can we just make sure we have a watching brief on those, because if they're to come back and they should be scrutinised by overview and scrutiny, we would need to make our arrangements, and we may indeed need an extra meeting. I find this really quite hard to manage. We all have busy lives outside of overview and scrutiny, and when we're having really important meetings like this, we want to allow enough time as individuals but as a board, and it's very hard to be planning that when dates are changed really in terms of council meetings at quite short notice. So I do think we need to be as flexible as we can. I think we might also need to request perhaps through Tanya, if we may, that it's quite hard for this board to be responsive and to allow enough time when we don't know what the Cabinet Forward Plan is going to be.
Thank you, Councillor Green. This is something that I have been discussing with the Vice Chair, with Tanya, and I think that messaging has been received. You preempted my point exactly. Already within the suggested timings for that meeting, it's around 4.5 hours. There is the possibility, likelihood, I don't know, that of the 4 items that have been pulled from Wednesday's meeting, 1, maybe 2, maybe none may come into the next meeting, which just leads me quite neatly to one of the questions which I was going to discuss with the board. We are at the stage still where we have an awful lot to consider. We've had a meeting today with 2 fewer very big items than we expected to have, and it's been circa 4 hours and therefore necessitated a day meeting. We only have probably 4 working days in which to conduct our overview and scrutiny board meetings, because primarily we're reactive to the Cabinet agenda. There has been some pushback, some comments from members about daytime meeting. Unfortunately, I think with the level of scrutiny that we've got to do, because of the number of items, we have felt like that there is no other alternative. There is, however, another alternative, which is to spread it over 2 evenings instead. So what are the board's views of, on the assumption that the next meeting is going to be 4.5 to 5 hours? Would the board prefer to have 2 evening meetings or one time meeting with a break like we've had? And I'm very open to suggestions on that. I'm having a lot of ones thrown at me, but Councillor Rigby.
Yeah, thanks. With regards to daytime meetings, I know for myself and other members, we've got 4 substitute members here today from people who couldn't attend, and I know that a couple of them are because it's full-time people who are full-time working. Personally, I've got holiday days left to take off work, of which I've used quite a few for ONS meetings. So from that perspective, I would prefer evening meetings, which increases the engagement from the members who should be sitting on this board and have done the training as well. And I know we're going through a lot at the moment, and it has been packed agendas, but going forward in the future, we haven't really stuck to the original meeting schedule which was put for this board. Even the meetings which we have had in the evenings have been earlier and started earlier than what they have done. And from a personal preference and from wanting to attend, I would prefer to split it over a couple of days.
Okay, Councillor Brooke.
Yes, I would agree with that, Chair. I've got 2 members who weren't able to be here today. Fortunately, one of them will be able to on Monday, but the daytime meetings basically preclude them from being on the scrutiny board which is unfair because they're the boards that not only they wanted to be on, but from my group point of view, they are the people that I would want on there, and therefore to exclude them because of daytime meetings is actually unfair.
Okay. Whilst I would completely agree, and I think that the hope is certainly once the patter calms down and we have much less huge agendas, my preference would be to do the same. I think we also have to be very open to the fact that I think it would be hard-pressed to accuse the board of over-scrutinising. You know, we've got some very, very big items that we are considering. The reason we've had to have 2 meetings this month is because we'll have, by Monday, I'm sure, have had to do a total probably 9 to 10 hours of scrutiny. Such is the level of work. Even if we had done that over, because the Vice Chair and I did look with Democratic Services of doing those 2 items over 2 evenings on the assumption that we didn't want to start early and we started at 7 o'clock, we would have been finishing each of those meetings after midnight. So I think for this particular cycle, we have a choice. I will sit down with the Vice Chair and look at whether, with the timings that we're looking at, and again, as Councillor Nicola Green pointed out, maybe with further items, it might be very difficult whether we can adjust the November item meetings over 2 maybe consecutive evenings. There are pluses and negatives. You know, I know people do have to work. There are those of us with children that would find evening meetings harder than daytime meetings. So it is a bit of a push and pull. But so long as we get the correct amount of scrutiny and we're not diluting that, I think at this stage we're just going to have to do the very best we can, but I have taken the points on board for that. Any further points on this? No? Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes. A very valid point from Jill that we do actually have the revisitation of the 5G item on November as well. We've been, the Vice Chair and I have been doing some work behind the scenes on that, and we will be, having listened the first time, it will be our opportunity to debate and formulate the next steps on that, which will also be a very big part that we will have to play. And we promised, actually, of those that came to the call for evidence that we would be bringing that back to our November meetings. So I'm struggling to see how we're going to do 2 evening meetings in November, but I will liaise closely with the board as and when we've got some further clarity over that. So I think that hopefully concludes the November meetings in Cabinet. Looking at our forward plan, it would be nice to be starting to flesh out further meetings. Already on the 9th of December, currently we've got the scrutiny of Cabinet items, and we've got other items to programme. Are there any, either through things that are coming forward on the Cabinet forward plan that we might want to get there early on, or other items of particular interest to board members that we wish to discuss in this time to start looking at whether we want to bring them onto the board? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. The shadow equivalent to this committee discussed and took reports from the various committee panels from the Bournemouth and Poole councils, and we came forward with items that we thought need to be brought forward to the ONS structure in the new council. And I think that there is a list that has been prepared that I believe Lindsay Marshall has, that we should consider when things have calmed down slightly when it comes to looking at Cabinet papers. And I'd hate us to lose that list, because that list took a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of scrutiny by the Shadow ONS panel.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. It's a very good point, actually. I do recall that we put things very deliberately onto that forward plan to make sure that they weren't lost, and we need to revisit them, make sure that they're not lost. So we will look into that. Other items full of ideas. Well, if I may suggest, if we use the time from now on for all members to revisit that first training meeting we had, where we went around and looked at our particular areas of interest individually. If board members want to take away and have a bit of a think about areas that they may wish to bring forward. You'll recall that the aim of this Overview and Scrutiny Board, yes, is to scrutiny, but also to the overview side. And I would like to see us being a lot more proactive on issues that we feel important with, that we want to drive the agenda with. I think we've done excellent work so far on things like 5G. We've had the Folkestone engagement, we've had the SIL today, things like that that we feel that we can bring to the attention and try and get some positive outcomes on. Perhaps even maybe look at formulating some task and finish groups or things like that, I think will be very, very welcome. So by all means, email myself or the Vice Chair and we can start to drive those positive agenda items forward. In which case, I think if there is no other business or no other items that board members wish to raise, I will formally close the meeting at 1:55. Thank you all very much for coming. Good afternoon.